The aristocrats at the social ball whispered that today, the one about whom too many rumors were circulating was supposed to appear. The rustle of silk, the clinking of crystal, the muted chords of the orchestra, a wave of silence rolled through the hall when the doors swung open. Luxurious long curls, a green dress that emphasized her chiseled figure, and all eyes turned to her. But what struck me most were her eyes, deep, bottomless, reflecting all her fears and hopes. The guests were whispering. Aaron Reithers appeared before them. They say the villainess took up a sword, so much so that even the maid ran away from her in fear in the middle of the night. The girl taught her, but she treated her cruelly, and only His Highness the Second Prince shows leniency to her. She walked like a queen through the line of frozen aristocrats, not deigning to give anyone even a fleeting glance. The villain of the aristocratic high society was named Erin Reithers. She was known as the eldest daughter of a marquis who was rotten with corruption and extravagance. The raging thunderstorm over the marquis's estate drowned out the loud screams coming from one of the rooms. The reality was that the girl was raised by a lady who never treated her with condescension. The little girl looked at the lady with frightened eyes every time, and her gaze sent shivers down her spine. In the dark, gloomy room, Erin sat on the floor with her head bowed, her body racked with pain and shaking with fear. Holding a long pointer, which often served as a punishment, the lady repeated, "Erin is just a useless girl." Every day she frightened her with thoughts of what would happen if her father found out about her behavior. The treacherous lady grabbed the girl's hand with a death grip, so painfully that Erin couldn't even breathe. Her fragile arm was covered in abrasions and bruises, but the lady didn't care at all. Every time she spoke angrily, even if Erin was a lady, in this situation she needed to maintain her posture and facial expression. The baby cried, afraid to say anything, while the cunning lady was dissatisfied with her behavior every time. Erin didn't know what love was, what affection was, and from childhood she grew up like a little animal in a cage. She fought her fears while her stepmother asked her to act like a real lady, to smile, and never show that she was in pain. The lady made Erin make the right facial expression every time to look like a real aristocrat. No one knew what horrors were happening in the Marquise's estate, and how the girl was treated cruelly every day, called stupid and pathetic. It started in her youth, with disgusting treatment from her stepmother, who abused her every day. She insisted that it was Erin's stupidity and pathetic nature that was the reason, and she repeated this tirelessly every day, but there was one young man in the house who understood what was going on here. He tried to persuade the girl to tell him what the Marquise had told her, but Erin knew it would be no use. She just silently endured her antics, day after day, and did not understand what she should do to finally make this horror stop. She was unable to protect anyone, and the maid who tried to save the girl was also cruelly punished. One day her life changed, but it couldn't be said that she was getting better while her new husband was trying to bribe her with sweets. The high-born aristocrat, the honorable gentleman, presented Erin with a piece of cake and was eager for her to eat something. Even though the girl was forced to marry him, she was still unworthy of it, although the young man was too kind to her. For a while she got rid of her stepmother, but soon something strange happened, and after that, her fiancé, the second prince, died tragically. Every day she told herself that the young man died because of her. If he had not gotten involved with her, he would definitely have remained alive. The voices in her head kept saying that the young man was engaged to her, and people were dying because of her. They were dying when she started getting too close to someone. Erin couldn't understand why such terrible things were happening in her life, and when she would finally be happy. She believed that she was truly useless, but she did not understand why this bitter fate had befallen her, where there was no place for love and pity. Soon something even more terrible happened, and blood from the sword wound sprayed across the girl's room. A stranger in a bloody cloak stood next to her, and Erin lay unconscious on the floor, realizing that this was definitely the end. The young man said that the madam told him to tell the girl not to worry, and that she would soon be able to reunite with her beloved family. Lying on the floor, alone, in a pool of her own blood, the heroine could not understand what she had done wrong in this life and why she was killed. Erin didn't always have this life. In the future, she lived in a huge metropolis and worked hard every day to survive and earn money. Working in one of the local establishments, the girl sold drinks to the city residents every day. She was polite to customers, and her boss never complained about her because Erin worked hard. Surprisingly, this was not the end of her life, and the lady was able to breathe again and just live a normal life. The heroine's name was Erin Reithers, and with memories from the past, she was reborn in the modern world and began her second life. Her second life was not much different from the first. Her parents considered her a disappointment and simply abandoned her, and in general she did not have a good relationship with them. And here is her life, where she was reborn again and began the third path, trying to change everything in order to finally become who she wants to be. For the third time, Erin managed to reincarnate into a brilliant strategist and knight of the family, and every day the girl carried out her duty responsibly. She had lived a hard life as a swordmaster, but at least this time she had some respect. But she had no idea why she was reborn every time, and again found herself in a completely different world. After she cleaned up, her new life began. Erin was reborn into new lives with her memories, starting from her very first life. This time everything seemed different. One night, the Knight of the Sword, clutching the sword with fingers wet with sweat, bravely fought with the monster. He dodged, trying not to fall into the deadly embrace of the monster, but the bear was too strong, too fast. The beast seemed to be woven from darkness itself, taking the form of a huge bear. The knight parried blow after blow, his steel ringing, reflecting the dim light of the fading day. Each swing of the clawed paw forced the knight to retreat. His armor received new dents and scratches. He felt his strength leaving him, and the darkness of the monster penetrated his very soul, sowing fear and despair. And suddenly, out of nowhere, Erin appeared, light as a forest spirit, her eyes burning with an inner light. A sword flashed in her hands, as black and sharp as her gaze. Without hesitation, without words, she rushed into battle. Her blow was like a clap of thunder. With one swing of her blade, she felled the monster. Erin stood motionless, her sword lowered, her gaze fixed on the distance, as if she saw something inaccessible to mere mortals. Having dealt with the monster instantly, she asked the young man to go as quickly as possible and help the other knights, since there was still very little time left. Erin Reithers was considered a stupid girl who was not protected by anyone and was one day abused by her stepmother. Erin was killed by her in her first life, but now she has returned with the memories of a swordmaster. She remembered every cruel word from her stepmother and other people who had abused her in her past life. The girl had absolutely no idea why she became Erin Reithers again, and why she was reborn every time. The bear stood up again and growled behind Erin, its eyes burning with hellish fire and its mouth spewing foul breath. Slowly, with the grace of a panther, she turned her head over her shoulder, assessing the threat the monster was not yet defeated. Erin, without wasting a second, grabbed her sword, the blade of which glowed with incredible power, sparks and crackling sounds. The blade entered the bear's skull as if it were butter, and the world froze for a moment. A deafening roar was heard, and the bear crumbled, this time for good. And now the warlike girl with burning eyes definitely did not intend to live as usual, as she had before. There was a special place in the Empire that was known to absolutely everyone, and it was the Academy of Talents. The Academy was the only one of its kind, where all talents from nobles to commoners gathered. Even royalty from other countries came to the Academy to gain unique knowledge. The Academy of Talents was an elite educational institution that not everyone could get into. And one day a girl arrived here who was determined to gain knowledge at this unique academy. It was Erin Reithers, who was confident that this was where she could gain the skills she needed. All her life she dreamed of coming here, and finally her dream came true, and she saw the huge building of the academy with her own eyes. Looking at him from afar, the girl could not believe whether it was a dream or a reality that she had created herself. For a while she looked at the academy with inspiration, and it seemed to her that it was more like a magical dream than anything else. A few days ago she returned to her first life, where the heroine was the main swordmaster and fought monsters. At first, she didn't realize she was in her first life as Erin, but soon it all became more than clear to her. The girl woke up in an unexpected situation. There was a lady standing near the carriage who was trying to protect her. I assure you that she might be scared. Erin realized that it was that same girl Sarah who stood in front of her, but she remembered very well how she had died tragically. Not quite understanding what was going on, Erin noticed Sarah had just called her Miss Erin, and the events happening at the moment were still strange, given the vast experience of reincarnation. While the knights were fighting the monster, the girl realized that something strange had happened to her, namely that she had returned to 20-year-old Erin Reithers. When the lady appeared on the academy grounds, many immediately noticed her, because this girl was truly beautiful. She was wearing a luxurious dress, as if she was going to a magnificent ball, and many had heard that she had transferred to the fencing department following His Highness. The academy students whispered to each other, wondering if this girl really wanted to date the second prince. Erin knew the aristocracy hated her, but there were far more haters at the academy than she had imagined. And that was the first reason why she transferred to the fencing department, knowing almost nothing about it. And the second reason was that she was engaged to the second prince, Ferdin. People whispered that she had forced His Highness, but in fact the girl did not want this at all. There were dirty rumors about Erin. She threatened to kill herself if she did not get engaged to the prince, and everyone was sure that she just wanted to get closer to him. The news quickly spread among the aristocrats, and the biggest victim in this situation was Princess Asili. After all, her only lover was unexpectedly kidnapped by that same villain named Erin Reithers. Aristocrats always looked down on girls, and talking about knightly honor was completely pointless. This is how the lady had to accept the title of the second prince's bride, while everyone around her hated her. Of course, the aristocrats couldn't help but hate her, because the lady appeared in His Highness's life too unexpectedly. The maid Sarah stood with her mistress at the threshold of the academy, while the lady asked not to worry and return home. Sarah was incredibly worried about her and asked if the girl was sure she was going to stay there completely alone. Erin knew she had to walk this path on her own, and she was confident she could deal with the vile rumors. Rumor has it that the villain Erin is known all over the world, and she is best known as her stepmother's possession. The heroine herself never intended to admit this fact, and in this life she was going to prove to everyone that she was a completely different person. She also had an incredible desire to save the maid Sarah, because she knew perfectly well what future awaited her. One day, Sarah tried to save her, and instead, her stepmother brutally killed her while Sarah was protecting her at the cost of her life. She was still experiencing the terrible consequences of those words, those events, which she still carried in her heart. So Erin was forced to do everything with her own hands, with her own strength, and this was something she could definitely handle. Erin knew that the path of a swordsman was a path of constant self-improvement, a path that required complete dedication and unwavering faith in one's abilities. The mirror reflected a girl with a serious, stern look in her gray eyes, not a hint of morning drowsiness, only concentration and determination. So much time had passed since all her reincarnations, and this time the girl put on the academy uniform with special respect. Her hand had been bandaged for a long time, and her wound was not healing for one simple reason. Touching the bandage, the lady felt terrible emotions, and dark memories stirred her soul, because the reason was that very stepmother who abused the girl every day. Erin's stepmother beat her until the trip to the academy, so her wounds simply didn't have time to heal. And the proof of this was the slight pain that constantly spread throughout her body because her stepmother beat her tirelessly. It was the work of Corellia, her evil stepmother, from whom she finally left, at least for a while. Erin put on a snow-white long jacket, and every day only one thought flashed through her head: why did she beat her? Since her stepmother had a hand in her murder, in this life Erin was going to figure out why a young man appeared in her room one ordinary day and killed her. What worried the lady most were the last words he said, and she did not know whether her family was truly aristocratic and wealthy, known for its knightly training. It was said that her father was a great swordsman, a high-ranking knight commander, and also Karen's brother, who trained in fencing to inherit the family line. The girl's family was destroyed until her death, and all this was the work of just one person, and her treacherous stepmother. At that time, the heroine did not understand anything at all, but now everything became clear to her, because someone had to be behind all the events. The girl heard approaching footsteps in the corridor and realized that someone probably wanted to meet her. Erin wondered if anyone could have come into her room today, but she soon realized who it could be. She remembered it was Karen Reithers, the girl's younger brother, who had a terrible temper. As soon as he opened the door, the first thing he did was scream, wondering if his sister had really gone crazy. Karen was indignant at why Erin was behaving like this, and how could you knights even walk when she could barely walk and had never even held a sword in her hands? The young man had been studying at the fencing department for a long time, and as soon as Erin saw him, she realized that his vile character was still the same. Trying to remember the events of her past life, the girl realized that on that time, on her first day of school, they had a quarrel. Karen continued to mutter something indignantly under his breath, while the heroine simply wanted to leave the room and not talk to anyone anymore. Suddenly, he asked unexpected questions, whether she really should have transferred to the fencing department. After all, he was sure that all the aristocratic students hated her for her past, future, and present. He grabbed her hand and his confusion increased. The girl dared to transfer to another faculty, and didn't even ask anyone. The boy shouted with angry eyes that his sister should leave in this situation, and that it would be better to never show up at the academy again. That's why he immediately burst into her room this morning, asking if she really wanted to make the situation even worse. Erin knew without a doubt that her brother was incredibly angry, because Karen was a student of the fencing department. In the future, he dreams of becoming a great knight, and the boy must have felt insulted by this act. Karen couldn't help but hide his anger, and continued to assure his sister that she should leave the faculty immediately. He must have been incredibly angry because his sister didn't even inform him of her actions. That was why he was now standing and holding her hand, not wanting to let her go anywhere at all, and wanted her to simply disappear from the academy. Erin lowered her head, not understanding how they had come to this communication, because before their relationship had been simply magnificent. When he was still a very little boy, Karen adored his sister incredibly, and they were one. They always protected each other, never abandoned each other in trouble. If someone needed help, everyone was sure to provide it. Erin recalled that as children, she and her brother were incredibly close, but for some reason, everything changed in an instant. Before, when they were still children, Karen always followed his sister everywhere, but now everything was different. The young man admitted that he did not understand at all what his sister had planned, and no matter how hard she tried, he assured her she would not be able to meet the second prince. The second prince was in the advanced class, Erin was in the beginner class, and Karen was sure they were not destined to meet. Erin knew the students had to be all together today because there was a swordsmanship assessment, but that was just for today. Karen still insisted that the girl give in and return to her previous faculty, and forget about the fencing faculty forever. He grabbed her by the same hand that was still incredibly painful and bandaged from fresh wounds. The lady was no longer going to fall for his tricks, and she only snatched her hand away angrily. Finally, the boy's anger changed to mercy, because he saw that his sister's hand was still bandaged. He asked why she hadn't told him she'd been injured, but Erin didn't want to admit anything else to him. She only wanted one thing now: to leave as quickly as possible so that he would no longer bother her with his stupid questions. Erin asked if her brother was finished with his questioning, and if he was, then he was free to leave. She has a lesson coming up soon, and she would like to prepare for it properly. The brother really didn't bother asking questions anymore, and he felt that for some reason the once timid sister was now behaving completely differently. Today, the lady had an unusual lesson ahead of her, and it was her first day at the fencing department of the prestigious academy. This place was truly special to all the students, and people even nicknamed it the last pillar of the empire, because it was this academy that raised brave and courageous knights who would protect against evil monsters. After graduating from the academy, students were immediately sent to territories that needed to be saved from incredible demonic monsters. In fact, the advanced class even receives missions to kill monsters and goes out onto the battlefield. Erin was well aware of this, and she really wanted to go to the first battle of her life as soon as possible. The second prince, Ferdin, also once went on an expedition on the orders of the emperor to defend the empire. And now the heroine was holding the handle of the door, which led straight to the classroom where the students of the fencing faculty were located. As soon as she opened the door, the students immediately turned their attention to her, and a deathly silence reigned in the classroom. The aristocrats stared at the girl, not understanding why she had really come here, or whether she would be able to hold a sword with such fragile hands. Erin felt uneasy as she felt the students' gazes on her, but now she needed to cast aside all doubts. In her past life, the second prince was killed and never returned, but now she saw a special person in the classroom. Erin stared at the two boys standing near the window, and goosebumps ran through her body. She remembered how the second prince brought her sweets, and every time she was worried when the girl did not eat anything. She remembered perfectly the minutes when he was killed, but life began anew, which meant the young man was still alive. With frightened eyes, she continued to look towards the two boys and realized that one of them was the very second crown prince. The students in the class were waiting for the teacher to appear, and in the meantime, each of them was busy with their own things. One of the young men was sure that no matter what he thought about it now, everything that had happened was too strange. He leaned against the wall and stood in a relaxed pose, insisting that Marquis Ryther's demand was, in his opinion, absolutely absurd. Marquis Rythers was the head of one of the 5 houses that stood at the forefront and protected the empire from bloodthirsty monsters. Although he never became a swordmaster, his defense was worthy of the highest praise, as he was the one who fought desperately every day. But they say that recently the Marquis made a huge mistake, which led to huge losses. Not only did he use his status and influence to get his daughter into the fencing department, but something else happened besides that. The Marquis insisted on an engagement with the second prince of the empire, and everyone already knew about it. And yet here, whoever is engaged to the so-called villain will be completely carefree. Ferdinand's friend, the second prince, was sure that this was absolutely ridiculous, because he heard that the Marquis's wife was crying and saying something. She came to the Marquis and tried to persuade him to save her daughter, insisting that if the girl was not betrothed to the prince, she would die. Apparently, Aaron Rythers had threatened her, and the boy was sure that this woman would always be an obstacle on their path together. The second prince's friend was sure that the girl never loved him and never would, and that she simply wanted to receive the coveted title of the second prince's bride. But Ferdinand seemed not to pay attention to his words, continuing to stare intently at the lines in the book. No one knew whether it was true or not, but the boy said one thing: he did not want to see the young lady die. But his friend was sure that no matter how talented the boy was, a terrible future awaited him. And as long as the emperor favors the first prince, the throne will never belong to him, no matter how much he wants it. Therefore, the boy insisted that his friend needed to become as strong as possible in order to obtain the coveted throne. He will only succeed if he trains hard and becomes much stronger than he is now. Karen was certainly a talented swordsman, but Count Assel was currently the strongest swordsman in the empire, and the boys knew they needed knights to be on their side. The second prince's friend was named Derek, and what he was most worried about was that Lady Assel would be incredibly upset about this. Karen seemed to not want to hear anything, and Derek was indignant he was having a serious conversation with him, but the boy seemed to have no intention of doing anything at all. He only noticed that the young man was definitely staring at something and had been looking intently in the other direction for a long time. Turning his head, he saw a girl in a white knight's uniform standing in front of the doors, looking straight in their direction. Derek stared at the girl with an angry expression on his face, as if he, like a predatory beast, was ready to tear her to pieces. The second prince admitted that he was not going to trust the ridiculous rumors because no one knew how things really were. He had already managed to see this lady once, at that very ball when all the aristocrats were expecting the villainess to appear. And as soon as she appeared before everyone, the second prince could not take his eyes off her, on her carefree beauty. As incredible as she was also mysterious, and this was their first meeting. Then she didn't even raise her eyes, so as not to see how all the aristocrats were glaring at her. As soon as she appeared in the office, the young man immediately recognized those deep eyes and pale face, like a porcelain doll. The second prince never trusted rumors and relied only on his own inner feelings. Therefore, he trusted only what he saw with his own eyes, and now that same girl stood before him. Karen immediately approached her and confessed that they had not seen each other for too long, and all this time at some moments he often thought about her. This was the first meeting after the engagement, which took place between the heroes, completely against their own will. When Erin first saw the second prince after being reborn, her heart was filled with only one desire. Even with all 3 lives she had lived, she could not forget just one thing that she remembered with each new life. When she saw the young man, she did not know what to say to him and felt that she would not be able to talk to him now. An inner voice continued to whisper to her that in her past life, the second prince died solely because of her. If he had not gotten involved with her, he would have remained alive. This time, the young man himself approached her, while the voices in her head kept repeating that everyone was dying because she was nearby. She probably should have smiled and talked to Karen, but the lump in Erin's throat kept her from saying a word. She decided not to communicate closely with the young man, even despite her great desire to be near him. Erin decided to focus on learning first, and today was the first lesson where they were going to test their ball handling skills. The senior students of the fencing department arrived at the training ground, and today they had to pass an evaluation in fencing. The teacher was a fencing instructor in charge of the new recruits named Edward Flawn. As the students knew, they had demonstrated their ball handling skills in the first World Championship, and today the older arrivals had to watch the younger ones. It was a great chance for them to study everything carefully, and the instructor warned them that after the briefing, they would immediately begin assessing their sword skills. Erin listened carefully to the instructor's information and tried to remember how she had passed her past life's ball handling assessment. This day was impossible to forget, and it was the greatest shame in the girl's life that she could ever experience. With trembling hands, Erin couldn't even lift the sword, and all the students called her weakling and just laughed. Thinking back to that horrible day, Erin realized it had indeed seemed rather stupid, but at the time she had absolutely no other choice. Since early childhood, the girl dreamed of learning to wield a sword, and when she was very young, her only desire was to learn fencing. She watched her little brother train with interest, but she had one huge problem. No matter how hard the little girl tried to sneak into class, her stepmother would always come and take Erin away from there. The lady was sure that the girl should never take up a sword, so Erin's dream remained just an unfulfilled dream. And so it was every time, because Erin was incredibly happy when she transferred to the fencing department. But one day, every joy comes to an end. She had really disgraced herself then, and her dreams had just collapsed in an instant, but now she had a different life. A young man named Philip stood with her. He looked at the girl as if something could change. In his past life, it was Philip who constantly made fun of and laughed at the student who couldn't even hold a sword. Every time he told the girl not to dare to call his name, and no matter what the rules were at the academy, he was of royal blood, and Erin was just a noblewoman. The heroine thought that Philip really did get annoyed when she called him by his first name, despite having a completely different status. The emperor's rule was that, including royalty, every student could communicate freely, regardless of status. In other words, nobles, commoners, and the royal family could communicate quite freely without any formalities. Philip tried to humiliate Erin. He called her a disgrace and assured that the lady would never become a worthy knight. Now Erin no longer wanted to tolerate the humiliation directed at her and confidently told Philip that she was not afraid of him at all. In her past life, she was timid and shy and never responded to such smirks. The instructor warned that the announcements were over and that all students would now move on to the fencing assessment. Of all the knights, he called Erin Reithers first and asked the girl to show her skills in front of all the students. The city girl told Philip that he should look right now at what she can do and evaluate her abilities himself. And this time she was confident that she was ready to show a completely successful result, so that everyone would finally understand whether she could become a real knight. The girl confidently approached the weapons rack and immediately chose a sword that would suit her. Considering the swordsmanship skills in this body, the heroine's hands were shaking from the weight of the sword, so she decided to choose one that weighed lighter than the others. Philip had already started laughing because the girl's hands were really shaking, and Erin felt that her hand was starting to bleed right now. Despite the intense pain, she confidently took the hilt of the sword, and none of the students could believe it because before she had dragged it behind her. Anyone can control mana, and of course the heroine had it. The amount of mana is different for everyone, and there was a special difference between this girl and commoners. Erin took up the sword proudly because she had already lived her life as a swordmaster, which meant she knew how to use her mana. Philip couldn't believe his eyes. The fragile lady was holding the sword right in front of her face, and her hands weren't shaking at all. Previously, the girl always shook during lessons. Philip tirelessly made fun of her, but now he sat and remained silent. Long ago, the girl's father called her and her brother Karen to tell them the story of their family. When they were still very young, their father told them that their family had a tradition that was passed down from generation to generation. It was a story about two descendants of a family who were born as swordmasters and had to fulfill their duty. The father warned his children that if someone does not see a swordmaster in them, it means that their eyesight is simply deceiving them. Unfortunately, Erin's father never became a perfect swordsman, and now his daughter, with a bloody hand, proudly held the sword. Her brother Karen also did not follow the path of fencing, and no one was able to continue the family business. And now, holding the ball in her hands, there stood on the training ground a fragile girl in whom her father had incredible faith. The heroine swung her sword desperately, as if it were an extension of her, and she was sure that this time she could do anything. The day, like many others, was dedicated to honing skills, overcoming oneself, and striving for perfection. At the same time, her brother was training at another training ground and skillfully honing his fencing skills. Their conversation with their sister seemed to remain unfinished because neither could understand the other, and the young man did not want to make concessions. Before the lesson, the lady warned her brother not to bother her with questions anymore and asked him to simply leave the room. Aaron went to class while the boy still couldn't find anything to say to her, but now his thoughts were occupied only with her. For some reason, Karen was worried about why his sister had sent him away, and he didn't understand how she was going to prove anything with an injured arm. He had received word that the girl had encountered monsters on her way here and injured her arm, and that the swordsmanship assessment for another class should now be over. He was training on a different field because he was in a different class, but suddenly a conversation caught his attention. Students walked past him and talked about Aaron Reethers, as well as about the old men from the faculty who were present for the assessment today. One young man was excitedly telling what had happened today on the training ground, but at that moment he felt a strong blow on his shoulder. He screamed in fear and certainly didn't expect that Karen would come up to him and ask him to tell an interesting story. Hearing his sister's name, the young man decided that he should find out all the information about what had happened today as soon as possible. The swordsmanship assessment was almost over, and the instructor remarked that the students had done a great job at this stage. After the lesson was over, Philip turned to Aaron, but this time there was no malice in his words. To the girl's surprise, the young man confessed his respect and asked her to accept his sincere apologies. Aaron never expected that this could happen, and indeed the biggest jerk of this class, Philip, was now standing right in front of her. She asked him to raise his head. All the students were watching what was happening, but the young man admitted that he was truly ashamed of those insults. Philip called the girl a true knight who proudly raised his sword. Now he was ashamed of his actions, and the young man all this time was simply blinded by prejudices and his ego. Now he realized that all the ridiculous rumors were just lies, and he respectfully only now realized who Aaron Reethers really was. Without any embarrassment in front of all the students, he asked them to accept his sincere apology and really hoped that they would have a wonderful relationship in the future. Aaron was a little surprised by this action because Philip had always treated her just terribly before. Every time he saw her, the young man never missed an opportunity to make fun of the girl, as well as her knowledge. A completely different Philip stood before her, and everything was truly radically different from the past. Many of the students looked at her differently, and Aaron felt that her life would definitely be different now. Changes were to come not only to her life, but also to the lives of the other characters with whom she would be connected. She gained respect from Philip as well as from many students who really saw her talent. There was only one thing left to change the fate of the second crown prince, named Ferdinand, who died tragically in a past life. Philip was determined to establish a relationship with this girl, who turned out to be completely different from what he had previously thought. He shook her hand proudly, and the lady loudly declared that she accepted his apology and now hoped for a more friendly relationship. But now Aaron had something much more important to deal with, so she was going to solve her problems as soon as possible. She approached Ferdinand on her own and, after speaking to him, decided to ask the main question first. Aaron asked the young man for the opportunity to talk privately, without prying eyes and ears, and because of this, the question was extremely important for her now. Today was her first day of training in a new life, but with the skills she gained from her past life. Ferdinand agreed to give the girl a minute of his attention, because he could tell from her face that she really wanted to talk to him. For some reason, Aaron, finding herself alone with the young man, felt somehow awkward and even began to feel embarrassed. All this time, Ferdinand stared at the girl, waiting for her to find the right words. He even admitted that he could devote more time to her if she really wanted it. Suddenly, he took her bandaged hand because he saw that her bandage was soaked through with blood, and it must be painful for her. He wrapped his handkerchief around her arm and warned her that after their conversation, the girl should definitely go to the infirmary. Without saying another word, the young man carefully bandaged her hand to at least try to stop the bleeding. In fact, Aaron now seemed to feel no pain at all, looking uncertainly into the eyes of this young man. The prince was always kind to all his students, fair to everyone, because he did not try to appear to be someone and was who he was. That is why he was kind to this sweet girl, but she was afraid that he must be upset about the engagement. Aaron asked if Sir Ferdan had received orders from the Emperor to eliminate the monsters, and he assumed she had heard it from her brother. The lady knew because her name was also on the list of exterminators, and the reason she called the young man was because she had a request. Aaron asked the young man not to do anything for her under any circumstances, and called him solely for this purpose. A mixture of incomprehension and surprise appeared on the young men's faces, and the girl's request sounded too strange. At this time, in Ferdan's office, the best students were discussing the lists of monster slayers that had recently become known. The students were well aware that exterminating monsters was one of the regular missions carried out by the Academy. The extermination group lists are usually compiled by professors from the magic and fencing departments. Faculty professors selected the 5 best students from each class and also organized a field mission. Derek, the prince's friend, looked carefully at the lists and was puzzled as to why some people were included. His name was on the list, as was the name of the second Prince Ferdan, but there was someone else there, and no one expected to see him there. A young man named Eamon Hedor from the advanced class of the fencing department looked at him with bewilderment. Also in the office was a girl named Lilia, who also studied in the same class with him. The young man assumed that his name was probably also on the list because he was one of the best students. He asked Derek why he was speaking as if he were the representative, when the representative had always been the crown prince. Derek stated that he simply wanted to warn the students in advance before the crown prince's arrival. Eamon looked at his student with a serious gaze, admitting that his love for the prince looked too suspicious. These words made Derek even more nervous, and no one understood the reason for his displeasure. None of them knew exactly the details or why unexpected students were included on the list this time. The entire academy was already talking about how excellent Erin Reathers had become with her sword. All the students were saying was that the girl was a great ball handler in the style of Reese, but her brother never expected to hear that. He was perplexed, as if it made no sense, and didn't understand how anyone could wield a sword when she hadn't even attended fencing lessons. Sometimes he saw his sister training in secret, away from prying eyes, because no one allowed her to do so. He knew very well that at some point the girl stopped studying because she was destined for a different role, the role of the lady of the family. So he couldn't believe how his sister, who didn't even know how to hold a sword, had shown such a brilliant performance today. On this day, the young man was also in this office, and he did not even suspect that there was a name on the list that was familiar to him. To his great surprise, his sister's name, Erin, was on the list, and this was too unexpected for him. One of the students suggested that perhaps the Marquis had added it, and the brother and sister were supposed to set out on a journey to exterminate monsters. The girl had only recently transferred to the faculty, but no one understood why only excellent students weren't allowed to participate in the expedition. Everyone saw the assessment lesson today and how brilliant Erin was. Derek was the most indignant of all, and he would never have thought that he would ever have to say these exact words. In front of all the students, he admitted that Erin had passed the assessment with flying colors and that there was no doubt about her talent. When Karen found out about this, he stated that he would never allow his sister to go out and slay monsters, and it was like a sister complex. Derek wondered if they were really that close, although he couldn't really assess the relationship with her right now. Suddenly, a wild laugh was heard in the office, and it was Lilia who was also stunned by what was happening. She turned to the students and said that this was incredibly funny, and that Erin's brother's behavior seemed too stupid to her. Probably the young man's words had some influence on her. She said that she would be very happy if she had a brother like him. Unfortunately, she will never see her brother again, because something happened one day, and the girl cannot forget it. She stated that everything happened precisely because of Karen's sister. She said this with such anger that even the young man himself did not expect such behavior from her. A tense dialogue took place between the students, and Karen declared that Lilia should stop immediately, and that these were just stupid rumors. The lady laughed maliciously and asked if the rumors could really be true that his sister had killed her brother, and if he really thought it was just nonsense. On the one hand, Lily understood that perhaps these were indeed rumors, but she had a completely different opinion on this matter. After all, everyone there believed the opposite, and the girl declared this in front of all the students. Silence reigned in the office, because the situation was truly unpleasant for all interlocutors. Erin's brother tried to protect her, but he knew perfectly well that the girl's words on the one hand could be true. Lilia patted Karen on the shoulder and confessed that it didn't matter at all whether his sister went to exterminate monsters or not, but if she did go, he shouldn't expect teamwork from her. The lady only asked the young man to be careful that her magic did not accidentally hit his little sister. These words made the young man incredibly angry, and he clenched his fist so hard that he was ready to break something right then and there. Their conversation was interrupted, and the second prince, whom all the students were waiting for, appeared in the office. With a serious face, a proud young man named Ferdin entered the office to discuss important matters. Derek immediately approached his friend. In fact, he expected him to appear much earlier, and he was probably delayed somewhere. Karen didn't respond to these words, but silently handed Derek his outerwear, while the latter looked at him in bewilderment. The prince sat down opposite all the students, and complete silence reigned in the room, because everyone was ready to listen to him. Derek realized as he hung up the prince's jacket that he had obviously just been talking to Erin Reethers and was lingering with her. After talking with the girl, the prince thought about her words for a long time and tried to understand them. Erin explained that the young man had received orders from the emperor to exterminate monsters, and she only wanted to know if he was really going on a dangerous expedition. The lady admitted that there was no need to disobey the emperor's order, and she was also ready to go. She made it clear that the reason she called the prince was so that he would not do anything for her. Karen notified all the students that this time a girl named Erin Reethers would be joining them on the monster-slaying mission. It was all too strange. The lady had just recently transferred to her fencing department, and the students couldn't believe why they had decided to send her. After a busy day, she confidently walked into her room and felt very tired, although she had not done anything special today. Thinking about everything that was happening, the girl looked at her wounded hand and at the bandage that the prince had tied. In her past life and in this one, she agreed to participate in the mission to exterminate monsters. Such was the will of the emperor himself. In her past life, things were a little different, and the emperor said that the girl's family probably had to put in more effort to transfer their daughter to the faculty, and that she probably has some skills. In the heroine's past life, the second Prince Ferdin expressed his dissatisfaction by turning directly to the emperor. At that time, he did not like this idea at all, and he personally went to the emperor to protest, but His Highness brazenly ignored him. Erin ended up on the final list of monster extermination candidates, and the heroes set off on the expedition together. In this battle, the second Prince Karen lost one of his arms while fighting a bloodthirsty monster. And on that fateful evening, the young man lost another person dear to him, Princess Cecilia, the best magician of the academy. He was then forced to choose between Erin and the princess, and he decided to save Erin Reethers, surprising the other students. Because of this, after the expedition, Prince Ferdinand suffered the wrath of the Duke of Acilia, who wept in despair at the loss of his only daughter. At that very moment, the position of the second Prince Ferdinand began to wane, and many aristocrats lost all hope for this man. The heroine knew all the details of the future, and she firmly decided that in this life she would under no circumstances allow this to happen. Clenching her will into a fist, the girl was determined that this time on the expedition no one would be hurt and everyone would stay alive. The mission was supposed to take place in about a month. The girl's wound was bleeding again, and she realized that before that moment she should improve her fencing skills and also pay attention to her mana. Erin was lost in her thoughts and didn't even notice how her brother burst into her room with an incredibly angry face, and he definitely wanted to talk about something. She didn't expect to see the young man right now and looked at her brother with surprised eyes, not understanding his enraged mood. The young man was incredibly furious. He approached his sister and began to speak rudely to her. But the next second he noticed something else, and in an instant his angry face nevertheless became similar to his brother's kind face. Drops of blood were running down Erin's palm, and despite all the bandages, for some reason her bleeding still wouldn't stop. The young man angrily asked why the girl's hand looked worse every day, and whether she was really going to fight monsters with such a wound. He also wanted to know what happened during the mastery assessment, since the whole academy was already talking about this lesson. At some point he stopped yelling at her, and the sister looked at her brother in bewilderment, who was simply very worried about her and could not cope with his emotions. Karen heard that the girl had been put on the monster extermination list, and he just wanted to know if she knew what that meant, and that it could be a one-way street. Erin understood everything perfectly, but admitted that she definitely could not go against the Imperial Order, and Ferdin himself could not dispute it. Therefore, as soon as she found out that she was on the list, she decided without a moment's hesitation that she absolutely had to go on this expedition. The brother was indignant. How could she remain so indifferent? Did she not understand that this fight with monsters could be fatal? He was sure that the girl did not understand what the word extermination meant, or that she had decided to escape from real life in this way. He felt it necessary to inform his sister that after a recent conversation with Lilia, he realized that the lady wanted to avenge her brother's death. Karen said he might speak ill of his sister, but he certainly couldn't believe she would voluntarily agree to go on a dangerous mission. Erin had already made her final decision long ago, and no amount of persuasion from her brother could convince her otherwise, so she once again answered that she would go. The young man assumed that perhaps his persuasion would at least somehow influence her, but he saw a truly serious attitude and realized that his words were absolutely useless. Still, he considered it necessary to try to persuade her, but this time Erin seemed to be somehow different, and she did not react to other people's opinions. A whole month of preparation passed, and the day of the fighter team's dispatch finally arrived, and all the students were serious about it. Lilia's brother was a teacher in the past, and she knew very well that this girl harbored a grudge and anger against her because of one terrible incident. Once upon a time, the young man was a cheerful and happy man, and one day he was sent to escort a young lady. Soon the brother returned in a cold coffin, his mutilated body unrecognizable, and no one could believe that this had happened. As soon as the sister learned of her brother's death, she was furious and desperate, and from then on she believed that it was Erin who killed the teacher. Today, Erin met Lillian for the first time since that incident, but the girl didn't know that the heroine had recently been reincarnated. She felt her cold, piercing gaze on her because the lady was standing right behind her. And all this time she was mentally imagining how to cruelly deal with her offender, and now she was ready to avenge the death of her loved one. The students had honed their skills, and now, clad in shining armor and armed with blades, they stood on the threshold of uncharted lands, a road ahead that would not only test their physical strength, but would also test their spirit. All this time, Derek had been keeping a close eye on Erin and her brother, and no matter how much he thought about it, this couple turned out to be too strange for him. It was strange, but for some reason these two seemed too close to him, and the brother couldn't understand since when his sister knew how to ride a horse. There was some tension between all the students today, and it was hard to ignore the silence of another student, Lily. Many knew what her sly, malicious smile meant, which never left her face when she saw Erin. Just before setting out on the expedition today, Derek thought, something is definitely going to happen on this trip. Fortunately, before the expedition began, Lily retreated and did not pester with questions the woman she was incredibly angry with. In addition to this, another lady went with the students, for whose life Derek was incredibly worried. Princess Asili, who also had many connections with the second prince, set out on a dangerous expedition. For Derek, this didn't just seem like some kind of dirty drama. He was worried that a huge fight could break out between them. Derek confessed to the second prince that exterminating the monsters this time would not be easy in many ways, and the young man was also worried about this. He asked Ferdin to reconsider his engagement after the hunt was over, and the people closest to him were soon to officially become his knights. By then, the first prince would have created his own power to counter the second prince, and the young man needed to be prepared for that. Derek was confident that the young man would soon secure the support of His Majesty the Emperor, because he was initially at a disadvantage. He warned that the prince might spend all his time trying to prevent internal conflicts instead of fighting heroically. In Erin's defense, Ferdin asked his friend if he had ever seen Lady Erin cause trouble firsthand. Asking himself this question, Derek stated that of course he saw that Erin was a villainous young lady from the Marquise's family, and the Marquise's family was truly unhappy. He was sure that they had long since lost the reputation that they had been building all this time because of their daughter alone, and it was good that she was not the only child in the family. There were indeed too many rumors about Erin. She was known as the most terrible villain, but Derek thought that maybe this girl was not who she seemed. While the heroes were moving in the right direction, one of the students noticed an open field and suggested setting up camp there today to spend the night. The sun was setting, painting the sky in crimson and gold hues as the students walked out into the open field. The decision to set up camp here for the night was unanimous and did not require lengthy discussions. Erin looked around. The sprawling field framed by a dark strip of forest seemed peaceful and safe, but she knew that danger lurked in such a picturesque place. All this time, Ferdin discussed Erin's past with Derek, but the young man was sure that all the rumors were a blatant lie, and she was a completely different person. Somewhere deep down, he trusted the brave lady, who certainly didn't look like a villain who wished evil on everyone. Derek was sure his friend was getting ahead of himself too much, and that he probably really should think again about the engagement. He only suggested that the young man should under no circumstances say this in front of Lilia, who was still very hard hit by the tragic event in her life. Ferdin divided the group into several teams. One was responsible for collecting firewood, another for setting up tents, and a third for preparing dinner. Soon a fire crackled across the field, casting strange shadows on the students' faces, and the aroma of freshly cooked stew filled the air, whetting their appetites. Erin took on the responsibility of preparing dinner, and her brother was surprised that his sister could cook, even though she had only attended etiquette classes for ladies. The cold penetrated to the bones, despite the flames of the fire, and hot food was most welcome now. Erin handed a cup of hot soup to her brother. He accepted it gratefully, smiling wearily, and as soon as he tried it, he was surprised at how delicious his sister was as a cook. Erin sat by the fire, preparing dinner, staring into the flames, her mind racing with thoughts of the journey ahead, the goal they were pursuing. All this time her brother was next to her. At one point he realized that now he really doesn't know who his sister is, and before she was like a flower when they were little. Just as there is no person who does not like flowers, the young man never thought that he would one day come to dislike his sister. Time passed, years passed, some time passed, and then the young man did not know that one day they would become so distant that even they would have difficulty talking. When they were still very young, Erin was going to meet her stepmother, and the boy asked her to give him at least a little time. For some reason, he remembered the situation when he asked his sister to stay with him and wanted to take her hand, which she angrily pulled away. Then she seemed to be out of her mind. She cried constantly and apologized to her brother for that situation. Karen just wanted to chat with his sister, but then she admitted that she was in a bit of a hurry and couldn't spend time with him. Erin left, and the brother still didn't understand why his sister suddenly became so cold towards him, and there was no longer that childhood closeness between them. From then on, he constantly continued to try to get closer to his sister, but he was hardly able to close the minimum distance. The boy began to feel sad because they had a warm relationship before, and after that he wanted to disappear into the ground. Every evening he went to his room and wrapped himself in a blanket. He began to cry quietly, and one day his stepmother came to him. He told him that his sister had changed a lot recently. The brother did not understand where the sudden changes came from, and strange conversations about the behavior began to circulate among the servants as well. Then the stepmother calmed the boy down and admitted that it seemed Erin had changed her mind, and simply suggested that he keep his distance for now until Erin returned to who she always was. She stroked the boy's head and asked him not to worry, promising that his mother would definitely take care of his sister. This alienation weighed heavily on Karen's childish heart. He missed their shared adventures, his sister's laughter and support. He tried to restore the old closeness, but Erin, although she loved him, was too absorbed in her duties. Years later, he would see Erin handing him a cup of hot stew by the fire, and in that gesture, in her caring gaze, he would catch glimpses of the same sister he had missed so much as a child. Perhaps, thought Karen, all was not lost. Perhaps this expedition, these common difficulties and dangers, would help them to regain their lost connection. He asked his sister how her new life at the fencing department was going, and so far everything was tolerable for the heroine. He understood that Erin was doing her duty, that she had chosen the path necessary for her happiness. Suddenly the girl smiled, and her brother looked at her intently and asked why she was suddenly smiling so sweetly. Erin was smiling for one reason: she and her brother hadn't been close for too long. They hadn't sat like this together for a long time, and it was even strange for her to hear him call her sister. Over time, Karen learned to live with this sadness, but the scar on his heart remained, and this thought gave him hope, warming him better than hot soup. At that moment, one of the students approached the heroes and asked if Aaron could really sit so calmly by the fire and enjoy a hot dinner. The young man said, "Just think, the killer was laughing and chatting right in front of Lily, and he was definitely on her side." Aaron didn't feel the need to respond to his statement, but this only irritated the boy even more, who was sure that she simply didn't care about anything. The young man's name was Eamon, and the brother decided to stand up for his sister and asked her not to start a quarrel, because they say that even a dog should not be disturbed when it is eating. Eamon was always rude and cold-blooded, and this time he decided that now was the best time to voice his dissatisfaction. When he realized that his brother was trying to protect his sister, he asked him to stop as soon as possible and mind his own business. The young man grabbed the hilt of the sword, and in the next second he was ready to fight the defender of the lady, whom he considered the real killer. Just as he was about to draw his sword, the second prince approached him and asked the young man to cool his ardor. None of the students needed a fight right now, so Ferdinand knew he had to calm the heated boy down as quickly as possible. He tried to stop him. Eamon looked at the prince in bewilderment and realized that he was really on this girl's side. All this time, Erin sat and remained silent. She did not want to quarrel with anyone at all, and the prince really ended up on this woman's side. The girl definitely didn't like what was happening, but she wasn't the one who started this stupid conversation. All the students looked straight at them, waiting to see what would happen next between the two heroes. If this continues, it will look like the prince is actually protecting this girl in front of his best students. The heroine understood that they could find themselves in a difficult situation. She approached Amon and admitted that he was definitely a genius in fencing. Aaron suggested that perhaps it was just rumors and stated that the boy had an incredibly sharp tongue, but it would be better if he handled a weapon like that. Eamon got angry in just a second, asking if she really had a dying wish in mind, and if that was what she wanted, he could kill her right now. The situation immediately escalated. All the heroes were tense. Someone was angry. Aaron understood that this all needed to be stopped as soon as possible. And at that moment, as if hearing her wish, the princess emerged from the carriages and declared that duels were strictly forbidden on the expedition. The look in her large eyes was filled with softness and quiet sadness. She smiled softly at the assembled students, and in her smile one could feel genuine kindness. The princess glanced at the assembled young people in their faces. She saw a reflection of hopes and fears, ambitions and doubts. Aaron learned something about this girl. The princess was loved by everyone, although she was often sick due to the holy power that overwhelmed her. Even with such a fragile body, she never shied away from exterminating monsters, and this girl was the former lover of the second prince, Sir Ferdinand. The saint of the empire of Lexia, Lady Asili, was the pride of the kingdom, and she had one goal in mind: protecting the empire and its people. The princess fell silent, allowing her words to penetrate the hearts of each student, and a silence fell, broken only by the rustling of the wind in the grass. As soon as Derek saw the girl, he began to worry. My lady went out in such cold weather, but the princess heard that there was some kind of commotion, so she decided to take a look. She had said hello to Aaron, and their paths had crossed several times, but now was the day they actually ran into each other like this. The princess did not appear at the engagement ceremony, but Aaron, placing her hand on her chest, admitted that it was truly a great honor for her to meet the princess for the first time. She never even exchanged greetings with the ladies during the battle. Until they and the monsters appeared, she never got out of her carriage. The princess also died very early, tragically during one of the expeditions, having fallen into the clutches of an enraged monster. Aaron felt awkward because the princess was looking at her too openly, and she was not at all embarrassed. Aaron must have assumed the girl was unhappy with her, since she was now engaged to her ex-lover. The princess came so close that Aaron was completely surprised to see her sweet face right in front of her. She looked closely into the heroine's eyes and admitted that she was seeing this girl for the first time, but she felt that Aaron was quite an interesting person. The heroine did not imagine it at all. She saw how the princess's eyes really did just sparkle. Suddenly, the princess said that if she thought about it, perhaps a duel would be appropriate now, although she would be the only observer here. All the students looked attentively at the princess, and no one understood what she wanted to say with these words. Perhaps right now she was trying to get revenge through Suraman or something like that, because she made it clear that a duel would be possible. Aaron proudly declared that if this was the princess's wish, she had no objections and was ready to engage in combat. The pleased princess took two students by the arms and declared that this was incredibly wonderful and that they could really arrange it. Derek didn't understand at all what was happening, and the heroine's brother was so outraged, but he couldn't do anything in this situation. And so, finding herself in the middle of a dark field, Aaron stood opposite Aemon, and the princess suggested that they conduct the duel in a modest manner. The main rule was to avoid harming each other whenever possible, and the heroes were to fight fairly and justly. After all, they had come here to exterminate monsters, not people, but now it was necessary to put an end to this quarrel. In the middle of a dark field, by the will of the princess, a sword fight was to begin so that the students could figure out who was right in this situation. Erin held the sharpened sword tightly in her hand, her gaze focused and calm, not revealing a drop of worry. Aemon seemed determined to crush her with brute force, but Aaron knew that was where his weakness lay. His stance, free from any unnecessary movements, corresponded to his reputation as a fencing genius, for the young man was known as the best student. Today the heroine crossed swords with him, but in her past life, Amon was a brave knight who was once ordered by the Fedden to protect her. Due to his foul language and lazy nature, he ultimately failed to become a great swordsman, but he was someone who understood what chivalry truly meant. While fighting for the monsters, after the death of the second prince, when Amon no longer needed to protect the girl, he still followed the order until the very end, until his death. And no matter how much the heroine owed him from her past life, everything was completely different now. These were completely different things. Now a tense relationship was developing between them, and the princess was closely watching the duel. After several minutes of fierce fighting, she began to seize the initiative. Her blows became more confident, and her defense impenetrable. Aaron parried another blow from Aemon. Hearing the steel of his sword cut into her blade, she felt the vibration pass through her hand, and realized that the enemy still possessed considerable strength. She didn't fear Aemon, but rather saw him as a worthy opponent who would push her to reach her full potential. Every swing of his blade was filled with confidence, and at some point Aaron realized that she really was inferior to him in strength. With a flick of her wrist, Aaron went on the offensive, her sword describing complex figures in the air. Aemon, not expecting such a swift attack, backed away. One wrong move, and the blade of Aaron's sword would touch his flesh, the tension in the air reaching its limit. The princess who had given the order for this duel watched the proceedings with an impassive expression, as if trying to unravel some mystery hidden in this confrontation. Aemon hesitated for a moment, then nodded in agreement. He understood that further resistance was useless. Aaron was stronger, more experienced, and more cold-blooded than him. Aaron lowered her sword. The duel was over. The enmity between them had not disappeared. It was just lying low, ready to flare up with renewed vigor at any moment. There was anger and disappointment in his eyes. He had not expected such resistance from Aaron, considering her just a girl and not a formidable warrior. Her eyes still looked as if the girl's mind was somewhere here. She thought it was normal. She had a couple more blows to bring Amon back to this world. The young man could not believe that the girl wielded a sword so skillfully, because he was the best student, and she had just won. Aaron's blade cut through the air with a melodic whistle, leaving ghostly patterns as she moved with ease and speed. The young man's sword fell to the ground with a dull thud, heralding his defeat, and Aaron, standing over him in an unwavering pose of victory, towered over him like a goddess of war. His youthful enthusiasm faded, replaced by the realization of his own powerlessness in the face of her unrivaled skill. No one could believe it. The best student had just lost to Aaron, and everyone saw it with their own eyes, just like the princess. The princess loudly declared that the duel was over, and they had a winner whose strength was beyond doubt. At this moment, Aaron was surprised by the princess's behavior. Was she really trying to take revenge through her best student? The princess stood there with an impassive face, as if she had expected this outcome and simply decided to test whether Aaron was really that strong. Dropping to one knee before the winner, Aemon explained how she managed to do this, since she had just entered the fencing department. The young man knew very well that the girl had only been using a sword for a short time, but she had just actually defeated him. Eamon clearly remembers the hands he saw at that party. They looked so pristine, as if they had never held a needle, let alone a weapon. He was sure she would never be able to defeat him, but now this victory seemed simply unrealistic to him. Eamon tried to figure out how a lady who knew nothing of the sword or knightly honor could master such unrivaled skills. Every lunge she made was imbued with grace and precision, every movement honed to perfection by long hours of practice. But none of the students noticed how bloodthirsty monsters approached them and were ready to attack. The scream of horror, stuck in the throats of the frightened teenagers, never broke through. The silence of the forest was broken only by the clang of steel, the sound of a blade colliding. Erin charged into battle, her sword slicing through the air in deadly arcs, severing the limbs of the monsters and sending clots of dark blood splashing around them. The monsters were pressing. There were too many of them. With every second, their fangs, oozing poison, were getting closer to the students. Their glowing red eyes looked at the heroes, piercing them with a chilling gaze. Their disgusting skin, covered with growths and thorns, glistened vilely in the semi-darkness of the forest. The monsters weren't just strong, they were vicious, hungry, and bloodthirsty. Eamon quickly forgot about the defeat and the duel, because now the students, awakening from their stupor, rallied to deal with the bloodthirsty monsters. The monsters surrounded them from all sides, and the heroes realized that they were now left alone, face to face with an army of demonic creatures. The first thing the young man did was rush to save the princess. He took her hand and they ran to the carriage so that the girl could hide there. Suddenly the princess felt ill, but the heroes didn't have a second left. They needed to escape right now. The princess's heart pounded wildly in her chest, and the air seemed to become thick and viscous, impossible to breathe. Her throat was dry, her legs felt like they were filled with lead and refused to move. She knew the monster was approaching, feeling its foul breath on her neck. Erin rushed to the princess's aid and began to attack the huge monster, her blade whistling through the air, cutting through the darkness in short, deadly flashes. The princess's face was pale as a sheet, and her eyes were full of horror, but a spark of hope was already beginning to shine through them. Erin knew there were too many monsters, and she definitely wouldn't be able to pick up speed in this situation. Eamon screamed. The princess began to have an attack. With each passing second, it became more and more difficult for her to breathe, so the heroes needed to find shelter. Wave after wave, like the product of darkness itself, they advanced on Erin, on the princess, on the last of the hope in this cursed forest. The monsters continued to advance. There were many of them. Their angry roar shook the air, foreshadowing imminent death. The monsters were moving towards them, but the heroes managed to hide behind the bushes, remaining unnoticed. Eamon and Erin watched the demonic creatures, and it wasn't like the heroes were completely safe now, but at least they were able to catch their breath. They hid behind a huge rock and, sitting on the cold, damp ground, tried to figure out what to do next. For some reason, monsters appeared faster than usual. Most of them were of average level or even higher, and perhaps this is due to the heroine returning to the past. During the fight with the monster, Erin herself did not understand how she was injured, and the young man asked to look at her back. She didn't understand what this madman needed, and why he had decided to show such attention now. When the lady attacked one of the monsters, the young man noticed that her back was wounded, and he just wanted to apply medicine to the wound. She got hurt when she covered him during the attack of the first monster, and he did not expect such courage from her. Erin knew perfectly well that the wound was on her back. She wouldn't be able to reach it, and she definitely needed help. It didn't take long to persuade her. Erin showed her the wound and asked why the princess suddenly had an attack. This girl had a lot of divine power. This kind of thing often happened to her, and this time the evil energy of the monsters stimulated her divine power. The princess was almost unconscious. The heroes guarded her, and Eamon carefully examined the girl's wound. The situation seemed a little unpleasant to the lady, and no one expected that the terrible monsters would appear so soon. Suddenly, the young man began to tell a sudden story about his childhood, when he was still a small child. One day he went with his father to an underground dungeon. The boy was unsure whether his father wanted to create a sense of anxiety in his son or to show him the deeper meaning of not committing sins. The young man still clearly remembers the prisoner he saw then, and these memories stayed with him for the rest of his life. A suspended man, emaciated from torture, hung on the wall like a parcel, his body covered in old scars. For some reason, the girl's injury reminded him of that terrible situation when he first encountered human horror. Aaron pulled the shirt off her back, and Eamon saw in horror that her back was no different from the back of the executed man. Aaron felt awkward because she had never shown her scars before. The young man did not understand who could do this to her, and who would be so impudent as to harm a member of the Marquise's family. Aaron calmly asked the young man to stop worrying and just look at her injury. The next second something happened. They heard the princess's heavy sighs, and something was definitely happening to her. The girl's breathing had been becoming more rapid for some time now, and Aaron was sure that her condition was gradually worsening. Aaron offered to act as bait so that the heroes could escape, but the young man refused the offer and took her words as complete nonsense. The lady screamed at him to stop talking nonsense, begged him to save the unfortunate princess and to stay alive. She said in a monotonous voice that he just needed to shut his mouth and get as far away as possible, because she herself would not be able to run as fast as he could. It was for this reason that he should go ahead and bring help, and Aaron was ready to go into a dangerous battle with monsters alone. All this time, the best students in the fencing department stood back to back, close to each other, awaiting the attack of the bloodthirsty creatures. Suspiciously, the prince clearly heard the roar of the monsters, but did not see them approaching. The young man was extremely attentive because now the lives of his partners were at stake. As soon as he turned around, he saw Eamon carrying the princess on his shoulders, who was still unconscious after the attack. Ferdin rushed to help, not understanding whether they had encountered monsters, because the ground suddenly began to shake and tremble. But he didn't understand why the heroes returned together, because she definitely should have been next to them. The young man informed the prince that Lady Erin had remained elsewhere, and they had to split up along the way so that he could bring help. He said the girl decided to become bait for bloodthirsty creatures, and his brother could not believe that she could do such a thing. Drops of blood on the grass, a swing, a blow, bloodthirsty creatures, and Lady Erin decided to engage them in battle alone. Adrenaline rushes through my veins, drowning out fatigue and fear. Every breath is a flash of icy flame. Every exhalation is a vow of vengeance. The grass beneath her feet turned crimson, soaked in the blood of the monsters, but there were only more of them, their angry, burning eyes fixed on her like a pack of hungry wolves sensing prey. Erin didn't back down, remembering the oath she had taken at the faculty, while the monsters tried to surround her and drive her into a deadly ring. The endless repetition of the actions from the heroine's third life, and this is not the first time she has fought with bloodthirsty, powerful monsters. In that world overrun with monsters, laws and order had long since disappeared, and killing swarms of monsters was not a choice, but a necessity. In that life, Erin saw only the pinnacle of swordsmanship, the pinnacle known as a swordmaster. If she had discovered her talent early in her first life, she probably would have been able to save many lives, but unfortunately, nothing worked out then. She remembered the faces of her fallen friends, the faces of those who had trusted her with their lives, and now she was ready to fight to the end. She had failed to save anyone back then, and Erin was not going to back down. She had many heroes to save, and she was the last hope glimmering in the darkness. A swirling mass of darkness, woven from claws, fangs, and stench, was advancing from all sides like an ominous wave ready to swallow her into its bottomless maw. But Erin didn't flinch. Her gaze, like the blade of a sword, was focused and cold. There was no trace of fear in her eyes, only determination and a steely will to win. She charged, her blade flashing, cutting through the thick air like lightning cutting through the night sky. Swing after swing, blow after blow, Erin danced a deadly waltz, leaving behind only mutilated bodies and a crimson trail of blood on the withered grass. Meanwhile, the prince's group tried to bring the princess to her senses. No one understood why Erin suddenly decided to become live bait. The brother was sure that the young man had simply abandoned her alone in order to save himself, and he did not understand whether after this he really dared to call himself a knight. Everyone was perplexed, but each of the students understood that they needed to save Erin, who was ready to sacrifice her life. And perhaps right now she is fighting terrible monsters while they are safe here. Lilia was trying to restore the princess's divine power and asked if Erin had willingly become a bait, and it sounded like she wanted to die. The princess began to breathe slowly, her strength gradually recovering, but this time the girl was too weak. No one could understand what was happening here, and why the fragile lady decided to rush into battle with the monsters alone. Lilia was sure that Aaron would definitely not be able to die so easily, and one of the students thought that she was only saying this out of revenge. Karen was slowly starting to get angry because Lilia was saying such words while Aaron was in great danger right now. He couldn't contain his anger. He was ready to pounce on the girl for her stupid words. The second prince turned to the enraged youth and asked him not to throw around such words, and that they now had completely different problems. None of the students could disobey Ferdin. He was the commander of the entire group and gave the orders. Lily immediately fell silent, realizing that now was not the time to address such issues. The prince only asked everyone to calm down as quickly as possible and warned that it was now important to save Aaron. The students realized that they probably should have sent a request for reinforcements earlier, because no one expected such an onslaught from the monsters. The one who would be most worried was Aaron's brother, and he declared that if something happened to his sister, he would never forgive Amon for his grave mistake. Amon understood that the young man definitely didn't believe him, because just a couple of hours ago he himself had said that his sister was a murderer. He screamed desperately. The girl does not know the honor of the sword and knightly dignity, but for some reason she has dexterous skills. And it was only because of this situation that many truly thought that the knight voluntarily left the girl to die with bloodthirsty monsters. Meanwhile, on another forest path, Aaron walked in the darkness in complete despair, tired and exhausted after the battle. There were bloody wounds on her body and scarlet splashes of blood on her cheeks, but the girl managed to erase all traces of herself. She dealt with the monsters using the sword's energy, which only a master can wield, and no one would suspect that it was she who killed them. Aaron needed to get back to her group. She was sure that if she just made a detour and returned to the knightly order, everything would be normal again. But as she walked along the path, a strange thought appeared in her head. Should she really return to her group? Looking up at the dark night sky, tired and exhausted, the lady didn't understand whether she was making the right choice now. For some reason she remembered Lilia's brother, a young man named Calypso, and the day they first met. He was one of those people whom the heroine could never forget, no matter how many lives passed and no matter how many reincarnations she experienced. He was the first to notice her stepmother's vile nature, and it was he who tried to protect her, assuring her that she should tell about what was happening as soon as possible. Each time he urged Aaron to do the right thing, and even promised that if it was difficult for her to do it alone, he was ready to be there for her. He wanted her to tell the Marquis about the lady's behavior, but at that moment the lady was sure that her father would consider her useless if she started to wag her tongue. Calypso was the person who gave the girl a little courage, and was also her only true friend, who always wanted not only the best. Her stepmother turned out to be a much more evil person, and one day Aaron saw the very first terrible event in her life, which shook her to the depths of her soul. The stepmother brought Aaron to the dungeon, where Calypso lay bloodied on the floor, his hands tied. The stepmother insisted that this boy had the audacity to warn her about something that never happened. Incredible fear, misunderstanding, Aaron faced such feelings for the first time because her stepmother was ready to kill anyone who spread lies about her. Calypso probably decided to help her in some way, but the lady understood that she should have said that her mother never beat her. It was too hard to bear, and in the end, she confessed. This is what played a huge, cruel joke on the girl, because now her best friend turned out to be to blame. Calypso's cold body was sent home, and thanks to her stepmother's lies, it seemed as if she was the one who killed him, but Aaron was completely indifferent to this. At that time, the heroine's reputation was already irrevocably destroyed, so no one tried to find out the real truth, and everyone believed the stepmother's deception. Standing under the night sky, Aaron tried to understand why she had returned to this particular point, when the lives of her best friends were at stake, and if she had returned even sooner, she would never have told Calypso what had happened. Unfortunately, the young man was already dead, but unlike in the past, the princess managed to survive today. Perhaps the future must change too, but perhaps if the heroine does not return but dies from the monsters, the better future may be destroyed. Now the heroine is completely confused, because if she had not been there, everyone could have been happy and stayed alive. The girl stood in the rain and did not understand anything at all, but at that moment she heard footsteps and saw the prince approaching. She could not believe his appearance. She was sure that she had gone too far and was simply lost. As soon as she realized that help was near her, the heroine's strength finally left her, and she fell unconscious on the grass. At the same time, strange events were also taking place in the Marquisate of Lurtis on that rainy night. The dark-haired lady sipped red wine and looked out the window, taking a small sip and feeling the tart taste of the drink spreading warmth throughout her body. The room was silent, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece, her gaze gliding thoughtfully along the streets where the first lights were coming on. A few days later, the castle was filled with knights, as if everyone was expecting something. There was a rumor about an enemy invasion, so all the knights were on full alert to launch an attack if necessary. For a simple marquis, this was an excessively large force. He had a huge number of knights under his command. He increased his power by defending his territories, and at the same time, this was proof that he occupied a fairly high position in the empire. But this power, wealth, and honor was enjoyed by the marquise, who reigned in his castle like a true queen. None other than a marquise named Corellia Lurthus was the head of this house, and all the servants were incredibly afraid of her. More than 10 years have passed since this girl remarried the marquis and was the only ruler here. High-quality dresses, servants who come running at the sound of a bell, and the lady has dreamed of a luxurious life all her life. Corellia is so accustomed to the privileges that only a marquise can enjoy. The lady said she might miss all of this if she returned to her original position. She turned to Knight Raymond, who asked if it was really necessary to return to her original appearance. All this time, the lady had been hiding the traces of time when she controlled the sword with the help of black magic, but he knew that this appearance was definitely not suitable for the role of the marquise. It happened about 10 years ago when the emperor heard about the outstanding skills of one of the warrior girls. Then Corellia was given a great honor. She was called a high-ranking knight, who was definitely stronger than the marquis himself. One day, the emperor decided to turn to her and summoned the girl because he needed her strength and courage. There were only 3 people in the empire who were called sword masters. All of these people possessed incredible skills. The emperor knew that there weren't even 10 people on the entire continent who could fight like that. Even from the highest throne in the empire, the emperor could not command these 3 at his own discretion, but he had no intention of leaving things as they were. He couldn't force these people to move according to his will, but he asked Corellia to make sure that these people didn't act out anymore. A lot of time has indeed passed since then, and once upon a time she was a warlike knight with sword scars on her hands. His Majesty the Emperor had long sought to seize the Marquise's house, a family that continually produced sword masters, so Corellia spent many years trying to sneak in. She divided and destroyed their greatest legacy, the young descendants of the Marquis, and became the head of this house. Until a certain point, everything went quite smoothly. The Marquis got stuck in one of the battles and almost never returned home. Then, unexpected events began to happen, and Corellia felt that she was gradually losing her power. The Aten Academy's suppression squad, sent to exterminate the monsters, completed their mission, and everyone returned safely thanks to a passing swordmaster. The girl's cunning plan was thwarted, and some stranger, a swordmaster, destroyed everything she had built over the years. Corellia was incredibly angry because she had built the hierarchy over many years and devoted almost her entire life to it. At that moment, a maid appeared in her office and apologized for being rude because she heard a loud noise. The lady admitted that her hand simply slipped, so she accidentally broke the vase and asked the maid to clean it up. The lady said that she was completely fine, and that the vase was simply standing on the very edge of the table, and she allegedly did not notice it. In fact, the lady was so angry that she broke the unique vase and only asked the maid to clean it up. She turned to her trusted mentor, Raymond, and asked him if he really thought it made any sense. The letter she received yesterday was indeed strange, and one of the few sword masters suddenly passed by at the same time, in the same forest, on the same continent. Corellia couldn't believe it. In this extermination of monsters, the princess should have died, but now she remained alive. And all thanks to an unknown person who managed to save her, but after her death, the Duke had to reject the second prince. Corellia went to great lengths to forcefully betroth Erin to the second prince and force her into the fencing department. Now some stranger, a scoundrel, unexpectedly ruined everything. The lady could not believe that her plan had collapsed overnight. The lady continued to be angry while the repairman tried to calm her down, because if she continued to break things, it would definitely cause her trouble. Corellia always listened to her assistant because he, with a cold mind, helped her make insidious plans. Raymond was sure that now was not the time to panic, and first, they needed to find out who this scoundrel was. A rumor came from the academy that Aaron was a skilled swordsman, and Corellia was also angry at this news. And now she needed to find out whether the words of one of the knights who told about Aaron were true. She already knew that the girl could deal with any monsters of any level with gusto, and now Corellia needed to know the truth. She still remembered the day she first met this child, a defenseless girl from the Marquise's family. Her radiant smile was completely carefree because then Aaron did not know what life awaited her with her new mother. The cunning lady never considered this girl as her own. She hated her and called her an annoying girl. What irritated her most were the eyes full of innocence, the grace like a flower in full bloom, the very image of being born into a noble family. Instead of dolls, the little girl preferred to run around the yard waving a wooden sword, and her stepmother immediately noticed this. Aaron was incredibly passionate about training because the blood of a swordmaster truly flowed through her veins. She loved to watch how the knights wielded a sword during training, trying to remember each time and then repeating it herself. The stepmother noticed that this child had the talent to become a swordmaster, and the girl desperately desired it. But she did not want the little girl to continue her father's work, and she scolded her every time she saw a wooden sword in her hands. Corellia had always been cruel to this child, and since she had failed to become a great swordsman, she dreamed that the girl would never become one either. The body and bones required for a swordmaster, the inheritance of the marquisate, this child who, despite already having more than he deserved, possessed incredible talent. Therefore, the stepmother was ready to do anything to ruin the little girl's life, so that she would never know true happiness. As soon as she managed to find out that Calypso was trying to help the girl, she immediately caught him, without fear of heavenly punishment. She grabbed and tied up the young man who knew how cruelly she treated the child. Calypso was her servant who once dared to lecture her, and this lady was incredibly evil, so she destroyed the innocent young man. The servant was an unplanned reward for her, but thanks to it, from that moment on, Aaron completely broke down, which is exactly what her stepmother wanted. For her, in the end, it was a good choice, and the selfish lady was ready to sacrifice anything just to destroy the girl's happiness. All her life she had strived for only one thing, to prevent her from becoming the heir of the Marquis, and she believed that there was very little time left. His Majesty had begun to act in earnest, so she was confident that the plan could no longer fail. She ordered Raymond to go to the academy so that the young man could confirm whether she had truly mastered the sword. Corellia was sure that with her shattered bones, even if the girl began to learn fencing now, she would at best become no more than a high-ranking knight. Even if that were the case, the girl had actually learned to wield a sword, and the formidable lady couldn't believe it. A terrible plan came into her head to prevent Aaron from becoming a swordmaster. She must injure her wrists due to an accident. Raymond didn't respond to these words, but even he understood that it would be too cruel for the girl. After the expedition, the students finally reached the academy dormitory. Irina spent a long time recovering, and her brother was by her side the whole time. The girl's hands were horribly disfigured by the battles. Her wounds for some reason did not heal, and she had no strength left at all. Aaron lay in bed, half asleep, every muscle in her body aching, reminding her of the recent battle with the monsters. The battle left not only physical wounds but also marks on the heart and mind. Finally, after several days, Aaron opened her eyes, and her brother was glad that his sister had finally come to her senses. And it was still quite difficult to get out of bed, and as soon as she woke up, Aaron was surprised to find herself in her dorm room. The girl realized that she had been unconscious all this time and did not even remember who had changed her clothes or bandaged all her hands. As soon as she tried to get up from the bed, her brother immediately angrily declared that she needed to lie down as long as possible. He insisted that his sister had gone completely crazy, that she had almost died, and he was angry because she had decided to become living bait for monsters. At that moment, Aaron saw how worried the young man had been all this time because tears actually appeared in his eyes. He was in no way angry with her, and judging by his reaction, he didn't even touch her clothes, because if he had changed them, he would have asked about the scars first. There was not only pride in his voice, but also a deep concern that empathized with every injury inflicted on her soul. If you think about it, his hand was completely healthy, and the heroine really did manage to save her loved ones, because in her past life, events unfolded differently. Erin turned her head, meeting his gaze, and in that moment she realized she was not alone. As soon as she realized that her brother was in perfect health, she felt an incredible sense of relief. Her brother sat next to her, watching her closely with concern in his eyes, a quiet presence that brought her comfort. He still couldn't understand why she did something that could kill her, and asked that next time it should never do that. Karen warned that if his sister was at risk of dying, she must first save herself. For a moment, it seemed to the girl that tears welled up in her brother's eyes, and he was truly very worried about her. Perhaps she imagined it, so the brother immediately turned away, asking his sister not to get out of bed. She admitted that she decided to get up to get some water, but at that moment the young man ran up to the table. Moreover, Erin woke up when the second Prince Ferdan was no longer here, but unfortunately she did not remember the recent events and how she ended up at the academy. The brother said that this man kept coming to visit while she was sleeping, and it irritated him incredibly. Erin asked him not to joke like that again, but the young man admitted that he wasn't really joking at all. Sir Ferdan did indeed visit her room while she was unconscious, but for Erin it seemed impossible. In a helpless state, he found her in the forest, and all this time he remained next to her, trying to bring the girl to her senses. Erin only remembered Ferdan's face when she fell on the grass. She was trying to tell him something. That evening she took his hand and asked him not to do this to her under any circumstances, and perhaps she really was going to die. Then she asked him not to be so kind, and she was sure that after these words he would hardly have come to her room. But for some reason her brother told a completely different story, and she couldn't believe that all this time Ferdan was there, worrying about her condition. The next second she learned the terrible news: the academy had recently allowed a visit from one person whom Erin would definitely never want to see again in her life. After her brother's words, a look of genuine horror appeared on the girl's face. He said that her mother was apparently very worried, and now Sir Raymond had been given permission to visit the academy. So she asked the academy to appoint Sir Raymond as her bodyguard, and the young man asked if that wasn't wonderful. And right now he was ready to invite Raymond into the room, but this news made Erin's heart beat wildly. At the same time, the best students gathered in the conference room of the central hall of the academy to discuss their achievements. There have been some strange incidents happening lately, and each of the students has definitely noticed them. During the monster extermination, what they thought was a pack of weak demons turned out to be mid-level demons, especially hardy and strong. Everyone knew that they were dealt with by a swordmaster who came out of nowhere. During the expedition, many mysteries arose, and whatever actually happened to Erin also influenced Eamon's strange state. But among the students, there was a young man who looked much more thoughtful than the others, and Derek noticed it immediately. The second Prince Ferdan acted completely differently than before, as if the expedition had really influenced his mind and life. Derek, who had been watching him all this time, noticed that the young man constantly visited Erin in the infirmary every day, even when she was unconscious. Ferdan, who always put on a perfect image, now quite often stared blankly out the window, with dark circles under his eyes, like today. The report on the extermination of the demons to His Majesty the Emperor could no longer be delayed, and Derek understood, as the prince knew better than anyone, that it would only be his loss. The prince was in a strange state, and the young man did not understand what he was thinking about after the expedition. A detachment settled in his eyes, a gaze directed into an invisible distance where, it seemed, he saw something that was inaccessible to others. The young man couldn't stop thinking about how he found an exhausted Erin, who for some reason at that moment asked him for only one thing. That fateful evening, Erin asked him not to treat her with kindness under any circumstances, so that the young man's life would not turn into a real horror. At first, Ferdan thought she was talking nonsense, but the girl insistently asked him to simply hate her and not get close to her under any circumstances. She lay on the cold, damp ground under the cold drops of rain and insisted that he must hate her just like everyone else. So Ferdan thought about her words for a long time and did not understand why she suddenly said something like that. Her words were absurd. She asked him not to show kindness, but simply to hate her, and Ferdan didn't understand whether Erin hated him too. She said these words as if she was deliberately pushing him away, and there was probably a reason why she didn't want the prince to be near her. The meeting had already begun, and Lily wondered if the prince should not continue the meeting right now. All this time the student sat silently at the table, and no one could understand whether he had really called people here just to sit and be silent together. Derek was indignant when he heard her words, but Lily was indeed right, and the prince admitted that he had called them to the meeting, but had been extremely inattentive. But no one saw Princess Asili, nor did anyone know where she went after the expedition. One of the students answered, "The princess went to Sir Aaron, and the heroes wondered why he just called her Sir." Eamon said that he ran into the princess on the road, and she heard the news that Aaron had woken up and also told him to continue the meeting without her. An angry Derek considered this to be rudeness on the part of the princess, and the prince was surprised that Aaron had finally woken up. The young man felt some relief, and it seemed that everyone had become quite close to this girl, and perhaps in the future they would be able to improve their relationship. Lily stated that it was necessary to report to His Majesty the Emperor about the absurd situation, everything concerning the strange phenomenon of a flock of demons that appeared in the northern forest. She also suggested telling about the swordmaster who came as if by someone's design, and the lady admitted that it was nice to celebrate the recovery of the killer without any worries. In Amon's opinion, the girl's words went too far, and she had absolutely no right to say such offensive things. Lily replied that until recently the young man had boasted that he was ready to flatten a nose with confidence, but now for some reason he had changed his attitude. Perhaps the shared experiences of the same crisis had created some kind of camaraderie, but Lilia was sure that this was definitely a stupid act. The lady could not accept the fact that Amon's comrade was someone else, or rather her worst enemy named Aaron. Lily was angry because she didn't want any of her comrades to get close to this girl. She became very agitated, and the next second she realized that this was not what she wanted to say at all, but she could not cope with her emotions. Having exhaled, Lilia sat back down in her place and asked for forgiveness, because she really had gone a little too far in her words, but she was trying to say something different. She was sure they must be worried about more than just the report, and hadn't the prince received the announcement from the academy? There was tension in the air, and indeed the students received a special announcement today. Duke Asili planned to visit the academy as a visiting outside instructor, and he was the father of the prince's former lover. The announcement came this morning that the Duke would soon be visiting the academy, and for Ferdin it was not very pleasant news. While the students were discussing important issues, something strange was happening in Aaron's room, and the girl was incredibly excited. Because right in front of her sat the princess herself, who, as soon as she learned of her recovery, immediately came. Aaron felt uneasy about the unexpected visit, and she never thought that the princess herself would express a desire to meet her. She didn't understand why the princess came to see her, because she had no reason at all to do so. The princess said she heard from Sir Amon that Aaron acted as bait to save the students, so she wanted to sincerely thank him. This man, in Aaron's opinion, was strangely burdensome, she confessed to the princess, and there was no need to do this at all. The girl insisted that she wanted to personally thank the savior, who was ready to sacrifice her life for the sake of the other students. The princess even healed her wounds from the divine power monster, but thought it would be better if the rest of the wounds healed naturally. The princess was a little embarrassed because she wanted to tell Lady Aaron something else besides the fact that she had healed her. Asili said that it was she who changed the girl into clean clothes and also made sure that she was sent to the infirmary. She smiled and admitted she hadn't told anyone about the scars and promised to keep it a secret in the future in case Aaron was worried about it. The lady had no idea under what circumstances Aaron had received these scars, but now she just wanted to support her and help her. And she was absolutely sure that Aaron didn't want anyone to know about her terrible past, because these scars couldn't have appeared out of nowhere. Aaron froze in surprise, like a bird suddenly seeing an open cage. The hatred she expected to see in the princess's eyes did not appear. The princess extended her hand to Aaron, a gesture that seemed so simple but spoke volumes of respect and perhaps even of a budding friendship. And she was very surprised when Aaron admitted that all this time she was sure the princess hated her. Since the lady broke up with the second prince because of her, Aaron thought it was obvious that the girl couldn't stand her. Now she realized that everything was absolutely not as she thought, and the princess really treated her with great respect. The dialogue, which began with tense silence, gradually developed into a frank conversation, where each one revealed a piece of her soul. The princess admitted that she was partly sad about this, but she couldn't say anything about it right now. Because there are other circumstances involved here that Aaron probably never heard of or even considered. The princess touched Aaron's hand, and one thing she could say for sure, she definitely didn't hate this girl. Looking at her with sincere eyes, the girl said that she definitely could not hate the man who saved her life and was ready to sacrifice himself. And since it was like that, the lady suggested that Aaron call her by her first name, since they now had a completely different relationship. The heroine was sure that she did not deserve such a title because she had never protected anyone in that way. That's why she was excited when the princess entered her room, because all this time she believed in her hatred. The princess, in turn, saw in Aaron the strength and determination that she herself so lacked, because in front of her stood a brave lady, alive, who had regained consciousness, and this was something the heroine had never experienced in her past life. The princess was incredibly happy when Aaron agreed to an informal conversation and asked to call her whatever she wanted. Asili was so happy that she admitted it and promised that from now on she would come to visit her very often. Instead, she was met with a gaze, happy and inquisitive, like a mirror reflecting Aaron's own doubts and fears. Aaron took her hand carefully, feeling the wall of prejudice and misunderstanding that had been erected between them crumble. The union, which had seemed impossible only recently, became an unexpected ray of light in the tangled labyrinth of court intrigues and political maneuvers. And, of course, she hoped that this unusual connection could change the world around her, making it a little kinder and fairer. After this unexpected time had passed, the heroine could no longer skip classes, so she attended the afternoon training, but there she encountered another unexpected situation. Eamon immediately approached Aaron as soon as he met her. Rumors began to spread among the students, whether they were now communicating well. He called Aaron sir and didn't use any formal language with her at all, and no one could believe it. Eamon was not afraid to approach the lady and call her that in front of everyone, while the students, standing in bewilderment, saw some kind of connection between them. The lady was so surprised that she even wondered if the sun had risen on the other side, and the young man had begun to treat her kindly. She also didn't understand why someone who should be in the advanced class was now in the beginner class. Eamon proudly admitted that he had decided to change classes and had now transferred to the class where Aaron studied. The girl was so perplexed that she only blinked and asked what it all meant. To advance to the next level of fencing in the department, according to the academy's tradition, one must complete a task given by the emperor. The types of quests ranged from subduing monsters to dueling knights, and among them, the young man took on one of the most difficult quests, so he advanced to the advanced class after great difficulty. In order to get a promotion, he had to go through all this hell again, the young man admitted. He came because he wanted to do exactly that. Eamon didn't think long and made a responsible decision, realizing that he still lacked a lot to become a worthy knight. He saw perfectly how she fought. Her skill with a sword was something to be envied. He saw her determination when the lady took charge of the fight with the monster and asked the students to leave. That is why the young man was able to save the princess, because Aaron acted bravely in the battle and everyone understood that they had no other choice. When he left the girl alone with the bloodthirsty monsters, he only prayed that she would cope, promising to send reinforcements as soon as possible. At that moment, he felt incredibly disgusted to leave someone behind, because he himself understood that the girl needed help. He realized that he didn't want to be so damn weak. He wanted to become a truly great knight. Despite all this, Eamon realized, he had been spewing arrogant nonsense at the young knight, saying that the girl knew nothing of honor. Once upon a time, he was actually someone who was simply overflowing with self-confidence, and now the young man really sincerely wanted to apologize, and he promised not to ask anything and keep his mouth shut about what he saw. However, Eamon was sure that when the lady fully recovered, she would definitely agree to spar with him. No hypocrisy, no arrogant ego, just a duel to test each other's skills. Aaron knew the meaning of that look very well, the desire to protect someone and the willingness to face even death for them. In Eamon, she now saw a completely different person, not selfish as before. In his eyes, she saw her own reflection. These were the eyes of a knight who longed to become stronger and possess all the necessary skills. And as a self-respecting knight, she certainly won't be able to refuse such a challenge, because now the young man has truly decided to change. Erin turned to him and stated that she was not against a training match right now, despite the fact that she had been exhausted just recently. She only asked the knights not to pity her under any circumstances because she was still a patient in the infirmary, and to approach the duel with dignity. Because she herself had no intention of giving in and pitying the young man, and was ready to fight him as befits two knights. They both understood perfectly well that there was no longer any need for empty talk, and the duel should begin right now. While Erin was absent from classes, her stepmother's assistant, Raymond, was already standing at the gates of the academy, and he almost had to spend the night in the open. Now the young man was burning with desire to visit Lady Erin as soon as possible in order to see her condition with his own eyes. Raymond knew that the dorm leader had said that the girl had gone to the training ground and should be there now. Suddenly he felt something strange and stopped, because the person he just saw definitely shouldn't be here. Raymond hid to watch what was happening, and someone was approaching the academy. It was the Grand Duke Asili, whose appearance was so unexpected for him that he did not even immediately believe it. The Duke was one of only 3 swordmasters in the entire empire, with mountains of monster corpses trailing in his wake, and he was the commander of the empire's elite First Knightly Order. A man who has reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship, adored and respected by every knight. The assistant reported that most of the expedition's monsters were high-ranking, and the Duke could not believe that the academy students had dealt with them. The Duke had come to the academy for a reason, and Raymond had heard that he had been assigned to investigate the latest monster extermination. The Duke's name was Ronald, and as soon as he heard that the students had dealt with the monsters, he asked his assistant not to talk nonsense. And did the swordmaster really appear so suddenly and deal with all the monsters? And in his opinion, it was too incredible. Raymond managed to overhear the conversation while the Duke was trying to find out from his assistant whether he really had no idea what it meant to become a swordmaster. He asked him not to be so reckless as to talk about the master's possessions, since he had never even set foot in this step. The Duke was a renowned man throughout the empire, great and agile, and to cover his entire body with mana, one must not only be able to hold a blade. Every time his assistant saw his influence, he couldn't help but feel great respect for his master. Therefore, the Duke asked him not to talk nonsense anymore, but rather to go and figure out what had happened on the mysterious expedition. At that moment, the Duke noticed Raymond standing nearby and immediately paid attention. The young man clearly felt that this man had just entered his aura, but the Duke understood that he was definitely not a student at the academy, but seemed somehow familiar to him. The assistant whispered in the gentleman's ear in front of him stood a sir from the house of Lurtus, who for some reason also ended up here. The Duke decided to talk about this man a little later because he already knew something about him. The Marquis always had only Sir Reckon by his side, and the assistant did not remember all the others very well, but he knew this man. It was Lloyd who favored this youth, and Raymond addressed the Duke with great respect, apologizing for the late greeting. The young man placed his hand on his chest and said respectfully, too much time had passed, but now they had finally met. Ronald looked at him silently and understood that this man must be a high-ranking knight. However, he understood perfectly well that he still lacked the knowledge and skills to reach a high level, and at that moment he asked his assistant where Erin was now. The Duke did not bother to communicate with Raymond and asked his assistant to go to the training ground. At that moment, he realized that the Duke was going to see Lady Erin under the guise of an investigation, and he had just ignored it. The young man did not like the feeling of being judged without reason, and they say the Duke is only interested in those who have talent for wielding a sword. All the academy students had gathered at the training ground, and something unexpected was happening there today. Lady Erin and Aemon stood opposite each other, ready to finally begin sparring, and now they were fighting on equal terms. Many assumed that if they looked closely, the students were not quite equal, but no one understood why they decided to arrange a duel right now. Erin was completely calm, and dropping to one knee, she was ready to begin the battle. But at the same time, Sir Amon, for some reason, looked anything but calm and balanced. The heroine decided to start with the easy way out, and tried to think through the next steps to enter the battle. Erin, despite her apparent fragility, demonstrated extraordinary strength and endurance, forcing her opponent to work at full strength. He skillfully parried her attacks, waiting for the moment to counterattack, and as soon as such an opportunity presented itself, his sword shot forward with lightning speed, trying to hit the target. The battle raged on, sparks of metal flew in all directions, and the spectators held their breath, mesmerized by this dance of strength and dexterity. Lady Aaron was quick, and Aemon didn't expect such a swift reaction. While he was measuring the next blow, ready to bring down all his force, Aaron suddenly changed tactics. The sudden change in the rhythm of the battle caught Aemon off guard. Her sword flashed like lightning in the rays of the sun, striking Aemon again and again, forcing him to retreat. The students, captivated by what was happening, watched in amazement as the fragile girl pushed aside the best student, as dexterity triumphed over strength. The next second, when the blade of the sword was right in front of his face, the young man realized that Aaron had skillfully copied his technique. She had only seen him fight once, the style was his family's, but now Aaron was at home with it as if she had known him all her life. Aaron, as if anticipating his intentions, disarmed him with one short, precise movement, and Aemon's blade fell to the ground with a clang. The academy students looked in shock at Aaron, who won the duel with Aemon and demonstrated excellent swordsmanship. Her quiet nature and modest demeanor did not foreshadow the potential that lay within her, but that all changed today when her blade found itself at Aemon's throat. After the victory, Aaron's gaze changed. A fire appeared in her eyes, and her shoulders straightened as if she blossomed, freed from the shackles of doubt. There was no way this could have happened. The top student actually lost to Aaron, and one of the students thought she was just lucky to survive the monster slaying. Aaron offered her hand to her opponent, and he asked how she managed to imitate his family's swordsmanship style. All this time, the Duke was on the training ground, and he noticed a truly remarkable talent in the girl. Aaron looked at him in surprise as soon as she heard that Duke Asili himself was among the students and had seen the entire duel. It was surprising, but the Duke got here very quickly, although news of his arrival came only recently. From the crowd, the Duke headed towards Aaron, but at that moment she saw someone standing behind him. It was Raymond, the very same assistant her stepmother didn't want to see at the academy the most. His presence here at the academy did not bode well. Raymond was always his stepmother's shadow, carrying out her dirtiest orders. His cold gaze and predatory smile filled Aaron with a chilling fear of what he wanted, why he came. Questions swarmed in her head like a disturbed beehive. But she didn't always treat him so terribly. Once upon a time, this young man was the one she was ready to rely on. In the Marquise's house, where it seemed to the heroine that she had no allies at all, he was like an oasis in an arid desert. It was Raymond who was her good advisor, and the person who once took her side, and she probably would have trusted him until the very end. He heard that the girl was injured during the extermination, and he approached Aaron to find out if it was too serious. As soon as he extended his hand towards her, the lady menacingly pushed him away, showing that she did not at all wish to communicate with him in a friendly manner. Raymond probably didn't expect such behavior from Aaron, who had always been quiet and timid before. Aemon stood nearby and watched what was happening, understanding how complicated Aaron's relationship with this young man was. She found a reason not to communicate and simply stated that she probably smelled of sweat after the fight. She saw Raymond and was flooded with terrible memories of him coming into her room and killing Aaron, telling her not to worry because her family would soon follow her. And everything would have been wonderful in their relationship if one day this man had not become her killer. A stunned Raymond was surprised that the lady was not ready to communicate with him in a friendly manner, but the future was known only to her. Aaron had to lie that she was glad to see Raymond after so long in order to play his game and take revenge on the man who would kill her. Raymond watched Aaron's duel and didn't expect the lady to wield a sword so skillfully. She was really good at it, and he couldn't even believe how long it took for the girl to develop such skills. She had only recently entered the fencing department, and too little time had passed to learn it. And Raymond began to think that the girl most likely had an innate talent, because it was impossible to learn this so quickly. He realized that it was precisely the talent of a swordmaster that her stepmother had been wary of when, as a child, she had forbidden her to pick up a wooden sword. Looking at her skills, he realized that Aaron was so good that she could easily compete even with the Duke himself. Watching the battle closely, he saw a completely different person in Aaron, kind and friendly. She helped her opponent up and even asked him to communicate as before. Raymond couldn't even believe that Aaron was smiling, and when she lived with her stepmother, he never saw a smile on her face. Now, when he extended his hand to her, she did not shake his hand, showing that she no longer had any relationship with this man. Erin admitted that she was very glad that the young man had not changed at all, but in reality, she knew what he should do in the future. At that moment, Raymond felt as if this girl had become much smarter than before, and she would never trust him again. The teacher asked all students to gather at the training ground to resume classes. Erin promised to see Raymond a little later, but now she had to go to class. Her partner, Eamon, followed after the girl, and Raymond only looked at the figure moving away into the distance. He felt that something had really happened in Erin's life, and she was definitely not who she had been before. And looking at his hand, which she pulled away from the handshake, he understood that his stepmother might probably have problems. Once upon a time, her stepmother, Corellia, completely broke Erin's mind and body to mold her to her liking, and her role was to break the girl's wings. Then Erin truly lost all the people dear to her, and her body and spirit were completely broken. The stepmother mocked the lady in every possible way, until that very core grew inside her that helped her move on. After this, the Sir appointed himself as her savior, and was sure that she should trust him implicitly. One day, a strange incident happened in the forest, and Raymond saved a girl from being attacked by a poisonous snake. Erin was walking through the forest and didn't even notice that a snake was approaching her, the bite of which could have killed her. Then the young man saved her. The girl was incredibly grateful to him, because if it weren't for him, she would have gotten into serious trouble. Perhaps Raymond himself was a different person then, kind and noble, ready to help at any moment. Or perhaps he did it because of his passions, because it was no accident that he decided to follow Erin that day. He saw the snake slowly approaching her feet, ready to pounce at any moment. But the girl managed to notice her in time, and Erin dealt with the snake on her own. Raymond just stood behind a tree and watched what was happening, and at some point he decided to intervene. Luckily, he told the girl it wasn't a dangerous viper, and he admitted that sometimes Erin really can be absent-minded. In the Marquisate, from which there was no escape, Erin became a complete outcast, a lady crushed by the endless bullying of her stepmother. Erin was a naive, unknowing girl who clung to the little warmth Raymond had once offered her. She looked at him with sincere and kind eyes, and was confident in his prudence and friendliness. That day in the forest, she offered him her hand, and it seemed to her that this young man really wanted to make her feel good. She clung to that little hope. Raymond was like a ray of sunshine in this dark world where only anger surrounded her. Raymond showed his concern and noticed that the lady had become lighter than before, and had she really lost weight again. The young man asked her to eat well, because if she continued in the same spirit at the fencing department, she would not even be able to lift a wooden sword. The sight of her face changing from despair to a search for light, frankly, simply amused Raymond and flattered his vanity. Today she pulled his hand away, and that meant that naive Erin no longer considered him a reliable person. The gesture made the young man incredibly angry, because he was sure that he had once been her savior, but now she did not want to communicate with him. And before him appeared not the same naive Erin who trusted and believed him unquestioningly. That same evening, in Ferdinand's office, the Duke pondered the duel for a long time, and Erin's talent truly impressed him. Precise swordplay, seizing the right moment to put pressure on the enemy, restrained movements and lightning-fast power. When the Duke caught a glimpse of Erin as a child, she looked so fragile and he doubted she could even withstand any kind of duel. Children grow up at an alarming rate, the Duke thought for a long time. Erin really managed to grow up to be a follower of her father. At that moment, the second prince approached him and asked how the Duke had been doing all this time. Ronald was really too deep in thought that he didn't even notice Ferdinand enter the office. The prince was interested. The Duke had previously said that he only came on official business, but now they were not in a private setting. He asked the Duke to speak freely. They were close to his mother and had looked after the boy since he was little. Ferdinand asked to be addressed as usual, and the Duke gladly accepted his offer. And since they were talking about this, the Duke decided to ask the second prince about the issues that were troubling him. The Duke had one pressing question. While he was devoting himself to the Empire, conquering the monster in the southern mountains, some information reached him. The Duke decided to ask if the second prince had become engaged to Erin without telling him a single word. This was indeed the case, and Ferdinand realized that the Duke was probably angry about this, since he should have been informed about it. The Duke heard that it was also an order from His Majesty the Emperor that he should be engaged to this girl as soon as possible. By the will of the emperor, they actually became engaged, and the duke was not even warned about this event. That's why the man was so furious. The idol of all knights, the duke, known as one of the three pillars supporting the empire. There was a fact known only to his closest aide, and the duke was perplexed as to how the young man dared to abandon his daughter, the saint of the empire, and choose some villain in her place. The thing was that the duke was a very loving father, and he was sure that the young man was obliged to marry his daughter. Next to them in the office was the princess, who informed her father that their relationship with Ferdinand had always been just a staged play based on a contract. It was just to keep the factions around under control, and they didn't even get the duke's permission, so the girl didn't understand why she was angry if he knew everything from the very beginning. He didn't want the princess to be angry at all, and he admitted that wasn't what he had in mind. It was just that to him, it looked like his daughter had been abandoned, and no matter how many times the second prince saw this scene, he still couldn't get used to it. The princess asked not to speak ill of Lady Erin, admitting that she had recently become a good friend. She asked if Duke Aaron had seen her in the training hall before coming here. He should probably be aware of how strong this girl was. The Duke fell silent after her words, because his daughter's words were indeed true. Erin has a very exceptional talent, and the Duke noticed it right away, because it is impossible not to see it. Now he wanted to find out from the second prince how willingly he accepted the engagement to this girl. And was it really true that she demonstrated her talent to him, her ability to wield a sword, and that was the only reason he agreed to the engagement? The Duke was confident and knew about the second prince's ability, about the special power that was passed down only through the bloodline. And the reason why the imperial family has retained its current status is the truth known to the world, the strength to impartially reveal the past of the goal, the eye that sees the truth. As the Duke knows, Ferdinand's ability is not something he can freely activate whenever he wants, but rather it suddenly and uncontrollably reveals someone else's past. The young man admitted that he had seen nothing to do with talent for the sword and told the Duke about it. The Duke suggested that there was probably something else there, and indeed there was something, but Ferdinand was sure he had no right to share it. The guy couldn't tell him the whole truth, and the Duke wondered what he could have seen there. Suddenly, the Duke declared that the Emperor was constantly looking for an opportunity to overthrow the second prince and was making selfish plans. He could not help the young man directly, but as a swordmaster he was ready to swear not to interfere in the affairs of the imperial family. Perhaps that is why the Emperor allowed the engagement to the villainess who became famous throughout the empire, and if she commits an act, he will claim that Ferdinand was unable to properly control her. The young man understood perfectly well that in this case, all responsibility would fall on his shoulders if Aaron made any mistake. Judging by the fact that the Emperor sent the Duke here to investigate the expedition, it seems he wants him to uncover their secrets with his own hands. The Duke asked Ferdinand to tell him what exactly had happened, and no matter what he thought, it was not a group of monsters that ordinary knights could handle. All the students find it strange too. The monsters were defeated before they even had a chance to assess the situation. The Duke thought for a moment and decided that he should also look at the others who had participated in the hunt to ask about what had happened. It definitely couldn't have been someone from the hunting party, and the Duke said that once people reached a certain level, they couldn't truly judge each other's strength. That is why he would really like to meet this secretive man to finally find out the whole truth. It had been a long time since the Duke had met a worthy opponent, and he wanted to look this man in the eye. The full moon appeared in the night sky. The Duke admitted that it was already late and suggested ending today's conversation. He and his daughter were about to leave the office, but he decided to say something to the second prince before leaving. The young man listened to him attentively because the Duke's words were indeed of great importance. The Duke thanked Ferdinand for the safe return of his daughter because the princess had been in danger that day. The academy students managed to save her, because that evening the girl had suffered a terrible attack. The young man was well aware of who had really helped the lady and dealt with the terrible bloodthirsty monsters. Therefore, he asked the Duke to thank Lord Amon and Lady Erin as soon as possible, since these two had safely returned his daughter. The young man was left in the office completely alone, and after the expedition he could not stop thinking about what had happened. Perhaps that is why the Emperor allowed his engagement to the villain, who became famous throughout the empire. Ferdinand thought about it. He really didn't know the details, but there was some information he didn't want to tell the Duke. Lost in his thoughts, the young man stood near the night window, through which bright moonlight was shining. In the courtyard of the academy there grew a huge tree, under which not long ago, a happy Aaron sat with a huge ginger cat. Recently, an incident occurred after which the young man realized that Lady Erin was not at all the villain they say she was. It happened just a few months ago, and the incident left its mark on the young man. The second prince of the empire, Ferdinand Alexius, was born to a concubine rather than his legal wife, but despite this, he possessed a kind and endlessly generous nature. All the girls at the academy were crazy about him, and they eagerly awaited the end of classes so they could catch a glimpse of the handsome young man. He was the one who suited the title of prince more than anyone else, but lately something had really changed in him. This was influenced by a certain event, and from that moment on, Prince Ferdinand seemed to become a different person. This happened after meeting the princess, and his changes could definitely be linked to her appearance. The heroes were close since childhood, and they were destined to become a happy family for the good of the empire. The meeting of the prince and the saint was enough to capture people's interest and ignite romance, and they were the ideal image of lovers that all people dreamed of. They were the kind of couple that love legends are made about, and they were perfect for each other. They didn't want other people involved in their relationship at all, and tried to avoid each other in every possible way. The princess couldn't accept at all why so many eyes were watching their couple, and every time she had to force a smile in front of everyone. One day, Ferdinand didn't like that the lady was walking too slowly. He asked her to think about her own walking speed and not blame other people. The two, who were actually like sworn enemies, secretly entered into a contract and declared themselves lovers several months ago. The reason they made this choice was due to the power struggle within the imperial family and personal grievances. The emperor always gave preference to the first prince. Because of this, the prince naturally came into conflict with the first prince one day, and the youth, who did not have a noble bloodline, inevitably found himself at a disadvantage in terms of power. The only daughter of Duke Asili, a princess born with the power of the saint, her father was a master swordsman, and like him, she never had any interest in power. However, soon the girl began to harbor a grudge against the emperor, like a saint, for only one simple reason. Having known each other since childhood, the two knew each other better than anyone else. Ferdinand needed protection to strengthen his position. The princess believed that he was the only one who could restrain the emperor and the tyranny of the first prince, and thus, these people's choice fell on a contract romance. The princess knew that she would have to make a choice about this, but at some point she felt that it was all quite tiring. Pretending to be good in front of others to protect her saintly image was unbearable, but now she had to pretend to be a loving partner. One day, a frank dialogue took place between the heroes, and Ferdinand admitted that he could break the contract at any time if the princess wanted it. She was worried that the young man would not be able to survive after this, but he was sure that since the lady was connected to him, her safety was also at risk. The princess was perplexed the young man was talking complete nonsense, because people would die anyway one day, whether he was the cause or not. She did not enter into a contract with him to save her life, but to make the best choice for the good of the empire. That day, the young man suggested that the princess take better care of herself, but the girl had already heard talk of an engagement. It happened on that very day, at a social ball, when all the aristocrats were expecting the villainess's appearance. Then the guests greeted with disdain the girl who became famous throughout the empire as the most genuine evil. Everyone considered Erin to be the real root of evil, but few people thought about what she was really like. It was at that ball, when all the eyes of the aristocrats were riveted on the appearance of Erin, that Ferdinand saw her. Rumors of their engagement spread throughout the empire, and many at the ball already knew this information. That evening, the young man chatted amiably with the guests, and one lady was glad to see him, but he was absent for some time due to business at the academy. The aristocrats were most interested in whether this rumor about the upcoming engagement of the empire's greatest villain was true. At the ball, one of the girls approached the second prince and told him that she had heard that he had recently been engaged to Lady Lurtis. Rumors of the engagement to the daughter of the House of Lurthis had already spread throughout the empire, and the emperor asked the second prince to attend this banquet and at least get to know her. Then the young man really found himself in a situation where he had absolutely no other choice. It was that evening that he saw this girl for the first time, the very one the emperor had ordered him to marry. When Erin entered the luxurious hall, Everyone stared at her, puzzled by what the insidious villain had forgotten at the banquet. The guests began to whisper, which meant that the rumor about the engagement must be true, but no one could believe how this was possible, since Ferdinand was dating a saint. And no one understood whether the young man was really going to get engaged to a woman like her, and everyone simply felt sorry for the second prince, who found himself in a hopeless situation. At the banquet, Erin felt the looks of hostility and contempt, and she did not want to participate in it. That's why when she saw Ferdin, she didn't even approach him to avoid awkward conversations. She stood modestly to the side, but the young man decided to approach her himself and presented her with a delicious piece of cake. Ferdin looked simply flawless. His sweet and friendly look won the girl's heart in 1 second. There were few people in Erin's life who treated her kindly, and life in the Marquise's house was a living hell for her, without any friends. That's why Erin didn't even believe that evening that someone could treat her as anything other than a villain, but as an ordinary girl. As soon as the young man approached her, he felt something strange in his body, and probably at that moment his ability was activated. The lady began to worry that the second prince had become ill while the young man seemed to be beside himself. He covered his face with one hand and realized that a powerful ability had manifested itself that he could not control. Literally a second later, the prince seemed to find himself in a completely different world, and this meant that he was ready to see the future and the past. Looking around, the young man could not understand which room he had just found himself in, because right now he was definitely not in a banquet hall. More importantly, for some reason his ability to see the future and the past suddenly manifested itself. Finding himself in a completely different place, Ferdin heard strange sounds that sounded like crying. Indeed, he was not mistaken. In the room sat a girl in a cloak, clearly resembling Lady Lurthus, who was crying bitterly. For some reason, now the second prince managed to see the lady in the past, and then this was her room. The girl was sitting on the floor and crying bitterly. Ferdin carefully approached her, but he knew perfectly well that at that moment she definitely did not see him. Erin was crying so hard it felt like someone had broken her heart, and she was in incredible despair. It was at that moment that the prince felt that he had once cried in exactly the same way in his childhood and felt an unbearable pain in his chest. The next second the vision vanished, and the prince found himself again in the banquet hall, with Lady Lurthus standing before him. He managed to instantly return to normal, but the girl was worried because the young man's complexion suddenly became incredibly pale. Ferdin felt a severe headache, which was not surprising since it was a side effect of his strong ability. And now he couldn't understand what he had just seen, and why this ability had decided to manifest itself at the very moment when he approached Erin. The girl could not understand at all what had happened to the prince, but she clearly noticed his agitated state. The young man's expression changed instantly, as if he had actually seen something. The guests noticed this and began to talk about whether the girl could have said something to make His Highness look like this. The aristocrats said that Erin really had an incredibly vile nature. As expected from a villain, she clearly said something to the second prince. The lady apologized to the young man and simply decided to leave to avoid the stares of other people. It was at this moment that the prince realized that everything they said about this girl was a complete lie, and that her nature was completely different. After all, he had just seen her, exhausted, crying on the cold floor, completely alone and unwanted by anyone. The prince thanked the girl for her concern and wanted to take her hand, because he realized that she was not a villain at all. He must have scared her and told her he felt a momentary attack of dizziness, but thanks to her concern, he feels much better. Everyone immediately turned around and noticed the situation, because for some reason the prince suddenly showed nobility towards her. He handed the girl a plate with a delicious piece of cake and asked her not to worry about him anymore. The prince smiled, looking incredibly kind, asking the girl to eat the delicious treat instead. Erin, on the one hand, didn't understand why the young man treated her differently than everyone else, but standing with this piece of cake, she felt good. After thanking him for such close attention and care, Erin decided that she probably just needed to leave the banquet. Perhaps because it had been so long since the prince had last attended a banquet, he felt unusually tired. Most of all, he could not forget his meeting with this girl and his vision that came to him so unexpectedly. This was definitely the first time the boy had seen Erin make such an expression. Lady Lurtis is known by many names, the greatest villain of the century, the shame of House Lurtis, the sole darkness of the empire, and a host of others, as if she existed only to bear every insult in the world. Malicious rumors always followed her like shadows, and yet despite this, he never saw her create any problems at the banquet. Erin rarely visited them, but even when she did, she would quietly spend a modest amount of time in the corner before leaving. Today she also left the banquet quite early, and the famous villain did nothing to warrant such talk. Throughout the banquet, the young man closely watched her behavior and only saw that this girl was incredibly sweet and kind. She left quite a lot of food and only lightly touched a piece of cake, while all the aristocrats ate the treat with pleasure. At some point, the prince realized why he was even thinking about this, because after the banquet, all his thoughts were occupied by this girl. Ferdin felt tired. He was in his office and accidentally saw a letter lying on the table. Before the banquet, he had already read the contents of the letter, and he did not like it at all. The letter stated that the young man was already aware that rumors were circulating about his engagement to the daughter of the House of Lurtis, and in it the emperor asked him to attend the banquet and meet the girl. True, at that moment the young man had his own problems because he had a completely different life. And who was he to worry about anyone else when his title was at stake? Thoughts about Erin did not leave him for a long time, and then one day a strange event occurred. Standing near the academy window, he saw Erin sitting under a huge spreading tree, and a large ginger cat nestled comfortably in her lap. Erin was humming a melodious song while she stroked the cat with all her care. This certainly didn't sound like the behavior of a real villain, and that evening the young man noticed it. The cat was incredibly affectionate and happy, and Erin happily stroked him and sang a cheerful song. That evening, the young man could not believe that this was really the same villainess who was now tenderly stroking the shaggy cat. People considered the prince a role model, an impeccable man throughout the empire, noble and influential. The truth was different. The emperor once declared that he was his mother's type from head to toe, and there was nothing he could love about it. The man admitted that he probably should never have taken this girl into his harem, and because of this, the blood of the imperial house flowing in the young man's veins, in his opinion, was wasted. His father always called him just a dirty half-breed because he was born from a concubine. In fact, his mother was a saint of the sacred kingdom, devoted to serving the goddess. Until she died of illness, she was the one who heard the voice and prophecy of the supreme being. His father crushed the sacred kingdom, and in one moment the boy's life was simply destroyed. He took his mother as a concubine and ruled the sacred kingdom as a vassal state of the empire. And even his mother, amidst all the humiliation and contempt, gave birth to her son, whom the father did not even want to see. To the emperor, who revered the imperial blood above all else, the boy was nothing more than a creature that tainted the imperial line. And if he had discovered that his son had inherited the imperial family's special ability, he would clearly have tried to kill him in early childhood. The emperor always longed for his death, and even his half-brothers and sisters hated the boy as much as he did. In a situation where you expect an attack at any second, wasting time worrying about others is truly stupid. For some reason, when Ferdin first saw the empire's biggest villain, completely different feelings raged within him. He understood perfectly well that he should hardly interfere in this girl's life, but for some reason she treated him completely differently. For some reason he kept catching glimpses of her in the bright light, and his senses were certainly not deceiving him. After everything that happened, the prince seemed to become a different person, and constantly looked thoughtful and puzzled. Just yesterday he had this feeling that he had seen something that he shouldn't have seen at all. This homeless cat, whom he often saw near the academy, was sitting on the lap of the empire's biggest villain. When he first met him, the cat was so thin, but now, even from a distance, he seemed quite healthy. The prince realized that the lady had probably been taking care of him all this time, but at that moment Derek approached him and noticed that the prince was constantly distracted. Ferdin didn't even notice that the lesson had already ended. Most of the students had left the class, and he alone remained sitting, holding a pen in his hands. Derek immediately noticed that the young man was acting strangely, and wondered if something had happened at the banquet yesterday that had affected him so strongly. The young man said that perhaps the prince had already heard something unpleasant from His Majesty, and perhaps that was the matter. The second prince's future knights, including Lord Derek, are unaware that they and Lady Asili were only dating under contract. They were also not aware of all the details of the imperial family's affairs, but they were well aware of how the young man was treated by his angry father. Ferdin said that nothing unusual happened at the banquet, but Derek doubted it because he heard that Erin Lourdes showed up there unexpectedly. He called her a vile woman who dreams of marrying the second prince, and it was no accident that she showed up at the ball. Ferdin confessed to Derek for the first time that she might not be as bad as the rumors said, and didn't he know how high society worked? A little rumor could fan a flame from a spark. Flames cannot stand in the face of truth, and Derek asked him to consider how a good man could maintain such a bad reputation for almost 10 years. He was sure that this girl was a real villain, and she definitely could not be a good and nice person. Part of the prince still couldn't believe it, because everyone called Erin bad, but he saw it all with his own eyes. And only he noticed what Erin really was, and that all the rumors about her were blatant, vile lies. And one sunny day, looking out the window, he saw how the villain was feeding a homeless, skinny cat with special care. Ferdin quite often had the chance to see unexpected sides of her that few people knew about. He managed to measure that Erin fed the cat in the morning, at lunch, in the evening, and brought him food 3 times a day. Erin was feeding the cat behind his dorm, which was in the old building, and students from the new building rarely came here, so no one could definitely see her. So if someone takes the long way around the back of the building, they're rarely going to meet anyone. Simply put, Erin always moved quietly and completely alone, so no one noticed her. The risk of anyone noticing her feeding the cat was small, so none of the students knew or suspected it. This was the very secret that only the young man knew, and every time he watched the girl take care of the homeless cat. On the same day, one of the students approached the second prince with a statement, and an unexpected letter arrived from the imperial palace. Ferdin didn't expect to receive any message, and it was probably very urgent. When he was left alone, he decided to read the letter, and at some point after reading it, he was overcome with incredible anger. As he read each line, the young man realized that he was increasingly in a precarious position. In anger, he crumpled up the hateful letter that came from his father, and he was clearly not in a good mood when he wrote it. In the family, the young man constantly felt burdened, and there was no talk of any kind of family love and affection. Like unchanging mountains, the suffocating days went on in his life, plunging Ferdin into some kind of incredible darkness. He was just waiting for it all to finally end, and the stray cat waited for Erin every day under a huge green tree. No one knew how it would all end, what awaited at the end, and what awaited the Empire's greatest villain. For someone like him, just waiting and unsuspecting, the sight of Erin gave him some hope for a brighter future. Every evening she came back to the homeless cat again and again with a huge plate of food. This evening she ran into people on the way, so she had to take a longer route. That same evening, the young man stood by the window and saw how Erin carefully continued to stroke the cat, promising to make amends and stay with him longer. For some reason, Erin at least slightly eased the heaviness in his chest, and he himself did not understand when this girl became his hope. One rainy evening, under the peals of thunder and lightning, Erin, in her nightclothes, sat and cried bitterly on the damp. In front of her was a fresh grave, opposite which stood a cross. The girl sat, streaming with tears, and did not even suspect that at that moment the prince was passing by. Ferdin didn't know what exactly happened that evening. He was awakened by the sounds of thunder, and for some reason he suddenly thought about the cat. Looking out the window, he saw Erin in the same place, and simply ran after them because he felt something strange. By the time he got outside, the lady had already left, and when he followed her trail, he saw everything with his own eyes. It was too late to change anything. He didn't know what happened on that tragic night, but for some reason, the stray cat was dead. After a few days, everything seemed to return to normal at the academy, and the young man diligently attended classes. His habit of looking out the window disappeared without a trace, and after that he no longer saw Erin at the academy. Naturally, she studied at a different faculty, but the young man understood that if she did not come near his dorm, they would never see each other again. As he stood talking to Derek, he suddenly heard voices below discussing how the second prince would have to part with the princess, all because of the ill-fated engagement. One of the academy students stated that there are rumors that it was the villain Erin who killed Lilia's brother. Derek laughed, and for him these rumors were incredibly interesting, so he invited the second prince to eavesdrop. None of the disciples expected that His Highness the Second Prince was looking straight at them now. Fearing his wrath, the students immediately tried to run away as quickly as possible and only asked Ferdin for forgiveness. Derek just smirked and called them sly brats, and they were the ones who would praise one day and then wait for an opportunity to slander. The prince had no intention of reacting to every rumor about him, and in his opinion it certainly wasn't worth it, but Derek didn't understand why he continued to ignore everything. Suddenly, the young man decided to ask why his old friend had once decided to follow him. Lady Lurthus was still haunted by malicious rumors, while the young man maintained the appearance of a flawless prince, but only he knew the truth. What is usually seen by many people is never the whole story, or that he saw her openly cry. Only the prince was able to see that this girl was once in such despair, and no one was with her. In the imperial family, his value was merely a polished facade, and the people he admired and trusted most were actually different. When Ferdin was still a boy, he already felt that evil people could be around him and slander him at any moment. The emperor and his henchmen always pursued the boy, and their goal was to humiliate him as quickly as possible. They had no choice but to decide whether to leave him or stay by his side and continue to suffer with him. The prince understood everything perfectly, but Derek was also aware of his family relationship with the emperor. The prince was sure that his father's oppression would never end, and at this rate, Derek and the others could find themselves in great danger. Suddenly, the young man asked if he really needed a reason to want to follow his best friend. Derek was overly ambitious, his swordsmanship was unremarkable, and the only thing he might have been better at than the prince was his studies. The young man frankly stated that suffering comes gradually into the life of every person, but this is what is called life. Therefore, if he has to endure hardships, he would prefer to do so by serving the one he once chose himself. It was Derek who turned out to be the one who did not pursue malicious intent, and that is why he continued to remain the prince's friend. After his words, the prince laughed joyfully, admitting that his friend was also not in his right mind, but he was clearly much better than the lazy Aemon. The reason Ferdin had not approached Lady Lurthus more openly until now was only one thing. In reality, he was simply afraid that his influence could bring even greater misfortune upon her, and he only wanted her to be safe. That is why the young man felt gratitude for the first time to his father for having made this girl his own hands, and for having arranged the engagement. After the engagement, he saw her for the first time in the academy classroom, and he couldn't believe that she had actually transferred to this department. It was their first meeting then, and Ferdin realized that this particular girl was unusual. She had just recently transferred to the fencing department, and for some reason he felt her aura was completely different. At that moment, Ferdin realized that he wanted to know as much as possible about her, but he was really afraid. Still, he couldn't control his desire to approach the girl to whom he had recently been engaged. That day, Aaron looked at him with sincere and kind eyes, and the young man was once again convinced that she was not the villain they were talking about. Since they were now night students in the fencing department, he decided it would be best to approach her first. Ferdin admitted that they had not seen each other for a long time since their engagement, and he was really looking forward to meeting her. Every night he thought about Aaron, and the real, sincere thought was not what it should have been. The girl he had seen so far did not act like the Empire's biggest villain. She would rather avoid people than harm them, and the young man was sure that the rumor that she had killed Calypso was also a blatant lie. He was convinced and trusted his feelings, because these rumors were definitely not true. It was for this reason that the prince wanted to know as much as possible about this girl, because he felt that she was not like that at all. Her vigilance was incredibly high. She always avoided meeting with other students and did not enter into dialogue with anyone. Ferdin thought for a long time about how to get closer to her. Was there really no way to at least get to know her better? About 2 months later, an interesting dialogue took place between them, and Erin herself expressed a desire to communicate with the prince. She thanked the young man for his time, and he was ready to listen to her with interest. Then Erin said she heard from the lady that the prince had received another task, and since then the princess had been visiting her room quite often lately. The young man had the feeling that he had heard this somewhere before he understood her words perfectly, but he was interested in her purpose. This might be his only chance to get to the truth, and Erin has revealed that it looks like she's planning to join the mission too. She approached him with one question. She was interested to know if they could work together on a dangerous expedition. Ferdin probably didn't expect the lady to ask him exactly this question, but in reality he was ready to do anything to at least get to know her somehow. The stepmother's assistant observed this conversation and was interested in what Aaron was talking about with the second prince. He watched them from around the corner, but he couldn't hear the conversation at all, and Raymond desperately wanted to know what they were talking about. After observing Lady Aaron for several days, it became clear to him that she was a master swordsman. This means that, as Corellia said, it will be difficult for her to avoid possible injuries in the battle with the monsters. The stepmother was sure that the emperor would soon order the second prince to lead a campaign against the tribe, and Ferdin and his young knights would have no other choice but to join. She was already plotting a cunning plan. Even if the count joined later, they could not expect any real support, and she desperately wanted Ferdinand Lexia to die there. The cunning lady couldn't wait for this moment when the second prince would die, and this girl Aaron would start blaming herself for everything. In her opinion, the girl should have believed that everything had gone wrong since their engagement, and she wanted to see if the swordmaster would come to the rescue again. So now Raymond just has to figure out how to deal with Aaron in order to fulfill his stepmother's will. Under the pretext of protection, he was going to join the mission, and even before the knights entered the territory of the Wolfskins, he was going to create a situation where Aaron and he would be left alone. Raymond was going to make her believe that someone had pushed her into the water, then rescue her and begin her re-education. He wanted the girl to believe that he was her savior and to start trusting again. If an accident happens during the process, there's nothing that can be done if Aaron loses the use of one arm. Raymond's insidious plan was incredibly cruel, and he was sure that the girl herself asked for this treatment when she pulled her hand back and betrayed him. Soon the students set off again on a dangerous expedition, where the best students of the academy were called upon. Eamon also took part in the dangerous journey, but this time he was sure that nothing like the previous expedition would happen. For some reason, this time all the students were tense, and each of them remembered very well what had happened last time. They needed to set up camp, but for some reason everyone was in limbo, and Derek declared that no matter how you look at it, everything that was happening was rather strange. From the very beginning of the expedition, he noticed that the second prince and Lady Aaron were constantly sitting next to each other, and this was quite unusual. Some were sure that this was very strange, but some of the students did not see anything like this, because the engaged couple simply sat sideways. A few days ago, the disciples set out on a journey again, following the imperial order. The mission they received was to subdue a tribe of wolfskins who were desperately trying to take over a small town. The students had to rescue the captured people whom the wolf tribe was trying to intimidate. The wolfskin tribe was a demonic species of beasts that possessed intelligence. They were stronger and had a very aggressive nature, and it was difficult for the support knights to deal with them. So His Majesty the Emperor provided one of the Empire's swordmasters, Count Leon, and his knightly order. Currently, the heroes were heading to the meeting place to meet Count Leon. No one expected that the mission would take place so suddenly. What Derek couldn't get used to most was this inseparable couple, because they had been walking together ever since they left. During the journey, Aaron and the second prince were silent, and it seemed that they had absolutely nothing to say to each other. Derek was puzzled if they didn't have any joint activities. Then why were they always together? A strange atmosphere had developed between them that was difficult to dispel. This time the princess did not participate in the mission and only wished the students a safe journey. Lilia also couldn't understand the reason why Aaron and Ferdin were now traveling together and being close. She turned to Derek, and as the second prince's best friend, he should probably know something about it. One day he saw Aaron approach Ferdin and confess that they needed to discuss something in private. Ever since their conversation just before receiving the mission, they began to travel together and never left each other's side. This was probably the main reason, but none of the students knew any other details. They could only guess why Aaron and the second prince suddenly started communicating, although this had definitely never happened before. Everyone was perplexed, because their union looked too strange for each of the heroes. There was one more person on this expedition, Sir Raymond, who volunteered to supposedly help the students. Aaron tried to ignore him, although she understood perfectly well that the young man had asked to go on this dangerous expedition for a reason. Each time, he seemed to be following the girl and trying to eavesdrop on any conversation she had with the students. This was definitely noticed by Eamon, who had already seen Raymond constantly hanging around him more than once. He found this man incredibly suspicious, since it was not by chance that he had suddenly appeared at the academy. He asked his friend, who said that Sir Raymond was participating in the mission as Aaron's guard, and whether someone had given permission. It was known to many that Sir Raymond had been supposedly guarding Aaron since childhood, and they should probably get along well with each other. Eamon had long suspected that this man was too secretive, and judging by his look, one certainly wouldn't look at someone one liked that way. He watched Raymond closely, who was not very willing to communicate with the students. He did not understand what he was doing there at all. While all the knights were watching the second prince, Derek noticed that they were about to leave somewhere. He wondered where they were heading at such a late hour, since they were clearly planning to go into the forest. Derek rushed to follow them, but Eamon tried to stop Aaron's brother and his partner from doing anything stupid. The young man dragged the knights along because they needed to set up camp, but they seemed to be trying to shirk their work. Lily also felt that something strange was happening this time. She was still tragically experiencing the death of her brother, and remembered the day when she saw his bloody body wrapped in a white sheet. She wept bitterly over the body of the person she loved most, her relative, and could not believe how this had happened. And when she saw Aaron going somewhere, she looked at her with an angry gaze, still wanting to take revenge on the villain. The second prince and the lady did indeed go somewhere, but they did not warn any of the students why they were leaving. Aaron asked the prince to go into the forest a little and suggested that they talk frankly so that no one could hear them. She had gone over these words in her head hundreds of times, and now the moment had come when she decided to confess something to him. Aaron carefully kept the words she had been thinking and preparing until now in her heart. She couldn't do it then, but now she plucked up her courage and decided to ask the prince for one request. Unexpectedly, she confessed that she wanted to break off the engagement, and the second prince certainly did not expect to hear this. This information was so unexpected for him that he couldn't believe why the lady would suddenly say such things, and Aaron admitted that he had no need at all to maintain the engagement that was forced upon him. The prince had to carry out the emperor's will, and the young man asked why she had done it in the first place. Aaron admitted their engagement had been just a momentary whim, and since she had said what she wanted, she decided to let herself go first. Ferdin really wanted to stop her and asked her to wait, but the lady confidently turned away and did not even listen to him anymore. He didn't even manage to grab her hand, because the girl left as quickly as she appeared in his life. Ferdin remained standing in the forest, still not understanding why Aaron decided to break off the engagement right then and there. He was at a loss to understand what had just happened, as Aaron had disappeared instantly after her words. The engagement between her and the second prince was arranged through coercion by her stepmother, regardless of the girl's feelings. And since the second prince was engaged to her, he had to part with his man, whom he truly loved, and Aaron was sure of it. Despite this, none of them ever held a grudge against her, and everyone treated Aaron with great respect. None of them hated her, either in the past or in the present, even despite their fates. In the past, Aaron was incredibly afraid of her stepmother. She dragged the second prince into the quagmire with her, where he died. This time she wasn't going to cling to him anymore, and as soon as she finished the conversation, she suddenly saw that Raymond had been watching them the whole time. The girl confidently approached him and asked why he was hiding behind the bushes like a real rat. There was a certain malice in Aaron's eyes, and she understood that Raymond was spying on her and the second prince. He certainly didn't expect to be caught off guard, but this villain was prepared for anything and was ready to deal with the hated girl. Overhearing their conversation, Raymond was surprised why she broke off her engagement to the second prince, and it was not her decision at all. Raymond chuckled and thought that the girl was acting so recklessly as always, but at some point she disappeared from his vision. He continued to hide behind the bushes and saw that Aaron had definitely been there just a few moments ago, but now the prince was standing there completely alone. He only saw the disappointed face of the second prince, who was standing all alone, but Aaron was not next to him. Raymond was afraid that he had managed to lose the girl, because all this time he had been closely watching her every step. And now, sitting behind the bushes, he couldn't even imagine where she could have gone, and he was incredibly angry. Just as he was about to go looking for her, he heard a female voice behind him, and it was definitely Aaron. She looked like a real villain and asked why Raymond was hiding in the bushes. She realized that he had been spying on them all this time. Raymond suddenly realized that this was the moment when he and Lady Aaron were finally alone. All this time he carefully hid, and was sure that the girl would never figure out his plans. He had clearly hidden his presence, but Aaron had somehow still found him, and he had just noticed a strange aura emanating from her. Raymond had never felt anything like this before in his life, and at that moment he seemed to be truly, incredibly scared. He felt a strange killing intent, and it was not something that could be dismissed with just one word. Aaron's eyes were devilish, and it was like meeting the gates of hell itself. Raymond couldn't understand where this aura suddenly came from on the fragile girl, and it couldn't be Aaron, who had only recently begun to learn how to handle a sword. There was no one else around except him and Aaron, and the boy sensed someone with such a level of skill, not believing that it made any sense. The lady walked confidently forward. Raymond followed her, but he still did not answer her question about why he decided to spy on them. At some point he became a little scared. The young man admitted that she probably misunderstood something. He smiled a cheeky smile and stated that he simply followed the lady because he was worried that she had gone deep into the forest alone with the second prince. And even if he was her fiancé, going deep into the forest so late at night could be dangerous, but Aaron didn't believe a word he said. But right now, with a sword in his hands, Raymond seemed much more threatening to her. The young man didn't even notice that he had been holding his sword naked all this time, and he laughed that the girl had managed to notice this. He asked why Lady Aaron had spoken to him in such a sepulchral tone from the very beginning, and admitted that it really did frighten him now. He continued to assure her that Aaron was too careless, too easy to trust people, which is why he was afraid that something could happen to her. Sir Ferdinand may have a good reputation, but Raymond asked the lady not to trust him too much, since, after all, they had only recently met. He asked instead not to trust the second prince, and was sure that the girl should definitely trust her old acquaintance. Raymond was like rain in the desert for Aaron. In a life withering from constant bullying, he gave her some strength to keep going, and Aaron trusted him and was always grateful to him. She knew of a past in which Raymond had once entered her room on a dark night and plunged a sharp blade straight into her heart. Everything was fine until one moment, when she found out that it was all just a blatant lie from the very beginning. Even after living several lifetimes, Aaron will never be able to forget the look on Raymond's face that night. Smile. Even though he killed her for some reason on orders, there was no trace of sadness or even guilt on his face. It was as if he had been waiting for this all along. His face was filled with pure relief, and Raymond was incredibly happy when he killed the girl. Aaron remembered everything down to the smallest detail and asked the young man if he really knew anything. She had never treated him badly and had always trusted him, but this time she told him that when the sword pierced the body, it was incredibly painful. And even if you don't die right away, you tremble in pain for a long time before you die. Her words sounded truly strange, and at that moment the young man realized that something was happening, and that she definitely knew about something. He could not believe that Lady Aaron, kind and fragile as she was, would ever show such hostility towards him. So now he suggested just going back, because everyone would be worried. The conversation could continue at the camp. Raymond was sure that the girl would once again fall for his tricks, but Aaron was already mentally preparing for something else. She agreed to go to the camp, and Raymond sighed with relief, because this naive girl believed him again. Who would have thought that Lady Aaron would one day look at him with such an expression on her face? And for a moment the young man was afraid that she had truly gone mad. To be honest, her stepmother made this girl weird, but the young man kept telling her not to be too overly disciplined. Over the past 2 months, he had been watching Aaron and continued to notice how strikingly different she was from her former self. The gentle eyes that were so easy to tease were now gone, and confidence shimmered in her eyes. The innocent eyes were suddenly replaced by eyes befitting a true warrior knight, but Raymond brushed this off as something unimportant. Corellia was sure that with her shattered bones, even if she started learning fencing now, she would never become a great knight. That is why she planned to injure the girl's wrist, supposedly due to an accident, and reported this to her assistant. No matter how much she had changed, deep down Raymond thought she was still the same stupid, naive Aaron who didn't suspect anything. And he knew that the more this girl resisted, the more fun it would be to crush her in an instant. Something similar had happened once before, and the heroine remembered, but could not understand what exact day it happened. She once walked with Raymond by the pond like this, and talked to him sweetly, when she was still sure that this man was reliable. At that time, she was suddenly attacked by an ill-wisher. The girl fell into the water and thought that she would die. But at some point, Raymond jumped in to save her. He pulled the girl out from under the water, declaring that he must definitely catch this man. After this, the heroine trembled with fear, believing that someone wanted to kill her, and her distrust of people grew more and more every day. Now she knew for sure that there was no ill-wisher that day. It was Raymond who desperately pushed her into the water. Now she remembered this incident and asked him if he really thought that she was obediently going to return to the camp. The lady reminded him that when they met again that day at the academy, she said some words to him, and Raymond felt that it could be dangerous. But before he could draw his sword, the lady deftly cut off his hand, for she knew perfectly well that this was exactly what he was going to do to her. The lady admitted that she was incredibly glad that the young man had not changed since the time when Raymond was shaking in pain. At the time, he didn't understand what she meant, but the girl was clearly making it clear that he remained the same villain he had been. Now, standing before him was not the naive girl who had assured him that otherwise Raymond might have had a chance for forgiveness, but he had chosen his own path. Raymond couldn't believe that this was really happening now, and it was as if Erin knew what he had been doing to her all her life. He originally planned to push Erin into the water and then rescue her, but things didn't go according to plan. He wanted to break her arrogant habits, but for some reason everything turned against him, and now Irina grabbed his insolent face. She asked if he was going to push her into the water, and that was his only plan to break her. She held him in a death grip and wanted to find out why the Marquise had ordered him not to let her use the sword. At that moment, with horror in his eyes, the young man understood the nature of the energy he had been feeling all this time. It was impossible to confuse it with anything else, the fear of imminent death that penetrated every cell of his body. Erin had been hiding her true power all this time, but Raymond couldn't believe that she had actually become a different person, and how that was possible. The young man tried to think of something as quickly as possible, because he understood perfectly well that right now he could die at the hands of that same stupid girl. The villain couldn't believe that the naive girl had become someone who could predict every move in advance. This was his chance to negotiate, and Raymond stated that all this time he had only blindly followed his stepmother's orders. He stated that he had no other choice, calling it not his own will, since his stepmother ordered him to make sure that Erin would never pick up a sword again. Now Raymond was at a disadvantage, and he admitted that they had known each other for too long, and Erin should believe him. After all, a stupid girl definitely won't be able to throw him away, much less kill him right now. A tragic young lady from the Marquise's family, who had never known love her entire life, and Erin heard that she herself had kicked out all the maids. She was a child who didn't so much know love as she wanted it, but Erin had never really done anything wrong. The more she craved affection and attention, the more people ignored her and called her the worst girl in the world. Erin was a child who had never known love and considered even the slightest attention a blessing. Because this was her only connection with those around her, and seeing the girl, Raymond decided that he would be the one to bully her. Suddenly, everything turned out differently than he expected. Now the lady stood in front of him with a bloody sword and declared that today he would die by her hand. Raymond still couldn't believe what was happening, but in front of him was Erin, who looked like the real villain in the Empire. He tried to convince her otherwise, assuring her that her stepmother was to blame for everything, but from the moment they met at the academy, Erin had already decided on her plan. Besides, she knew his plan. The young man planned to push her into the pond, then pull her out to win her over, whispering that she was the only one for him. And now, finding himself on the brink of death, he declared that this was all a misunderstanding. It was his stepmother who ordered the lady to be thrown into the water. Raymond begged for mercy. He was already disarmed, and he was sure it was the same as simply surrendering, and a knight should not treat the defenseless like that. He asked if the girl really believed that killing a living creature would send her to hell. In the past and even now, Erin believed in heaven and hell in her first life. In her innocent youth, she thought that if she lived virtuously, she would definitely go to heaven. She promised herself to feed her virtue, to listen carefully to her mother and not to hate anyone, promising herself to one day become good, so that at some point she would find herself in heaven. Until her last moment, this naive girl tried not to despise anyone, and one day she also begged Raymond not to kill her. In her past life, she clung to his legs, begging him to let her go, and even if this miserable life was hell, she still wanted to survive. Aaron said that the boy didn't care at all that day until he understood what she was talking about. The lady didn't want to listen to his stupid words anymore because she saw that this man would never change. And if he was ordered to kill her, he would do it. So Aaron plunged the bloody sword into his heart and decided to kill him right then and there. Aaron plunged her sword into the villain Raymond's heart and whispered for him to wait for her in hell, blood splashing on her face. His eyes were filled with fear mixed with hatred, the last thing he could offer her. His angry cries, his threats, his lies were no longer heard. Aaron stood silently clutching the bloody sword. She looked at his dead body and declared that when this was all over, they would definitely be able to meet in hell. At this moment, a real commotion began in the camp because Derek was just about to go look for the prince because he had disappeared for a long time. The excited young man ran out of the forest and said that Aaron had gone somewhere. She had been gone for a long time. He tried to find her, but suddenly the girl disappeared after the conversation, and he was unable to figure out where she was. The knights became incredibly worried because the second prince looked so frightened as if he had met a ghost. He said Aaron was with him just a minute ago, but suddenly said she would go ahead, and then disappeared without a trace. All this time he carefully searched the area, but could not find her, so he asked to wake everyone up to immediately find Aaron. Derek asked his friend not to worry after seeing his strong excitement, but suddenly they heard a familiar female voice. Suddenly, Aaron herself appeared in front of them, and no one even saw her come back to the camp. The prince ran up to the girl and asked when she had managed to return, but the lady admitted that she had simply gone ahead and returned. The young man was incredibly worried and thought that the lady had gone off somewhere alone again, like last time, but she sure asked him not to worry about her. She promised not to go anywhere and not to act as bravely as she had done on the previous expedition. The students stood in bewilderment because the prince certainly couldn't have made this up, but the girl really was there. The other knights heard that there was a fight going on in the camp and came out to see what was going on. Derek tried to calm his friend down and stated that the lady wouldn't go anywhere if they had already decided everything, they just needed to go back inside. Since Aaron had returned safely and was at camp, everyone decided it was necessary to get some proper rest. Derek sent Aaron's brother to do some cleaning so that things would finally calm down at camp. In the past, Sir Ferdinand also once worried about the heroine, just as he does today. He once told her that no matter what others said, he didn't believe that the lady had killed Calypso with her own hands. The young man was completely sure that the girl was not the type to kill an innocent person, and his heart had never deceived him. And he admitted that if Aaron didn't want to talk about what she had been through, she didn't have to. And then he took her hand and admitted that if she ever felt ready, he would definitely be there to help her. The moment of recognition never came. By the time the heroine finally decided to open up, Ferdinand was no longer in this world, and it was all too late. Even before his death, Raymond said that no one would ever love Aaron for the rest of her life, and he didn't know what miracle would happen to her. Before he died, he said she would never be able to live the same way again, but Aaron had a completely different opinion. Indeed, she was now a terrible murderer, and she intended to keep this secret in her heart for the rest of her days. She threw Raymond's body off the cliff into the dark forest and declared that she no longer cared about it. Even if Ferdinand despises her, it's okay. If her merciless hands make people call her a villain, it doesn't matter at all, because Aaron has already gotten used to the hatred. If there were any who threatened the second prince and the order, Aaron was ready to deal with them. For this reason, she happily decided to become a demon, a killer, or anything else, as long as the people dear to her remained safe. After spending the night, all the knights had to move on, each of them doing his own thing. Aaron didn't let on that something terrible had happened that night, and that she had killed the biggest villain in her life with her own hands. Her brother approached her with one question, and Aaron knew that someone was probably missing. Not surprisingly, the young man asked if his sister had seen Sir Raymond by chance, because he had disappeared without a trace. They needed to leave as soon as possible, but Raymond had disappeared somewhere. There was no luggage in his tent, and there was no horse in sight. She thought everything through thoroughly, and that same night she took all the things away so that it would look like they had disappeared without a trace. She also led his horse away from the camp, loading it with all his things so that everyone would think that Raymond had simply disappeared. Only Aaron knew the terrible truth, and none of the students understood what was happening here. Some of the students recently checked his tent. All of Raymond's things were missing, and his horse was also missing without a trace. The knights assumed that perhaps the young man had decided to return to the marquisate before them, without the commander's permission. The second prince asked Aaron if she had heard that he had any urgent business, but the lady admitted that she had hardly spoken to him. Sir was a high-ranking knight, and Amun was sure that nothing terrible could happen to a man of his rank, since there were no low-level monsters in this area. The excuse was indeed quite convenient, since Amun had been suspicious of this man from the very beginning. His manners and appearance always worried him, so he assumed that this man could do whatever he wanted. Despite Sir Raymond's behavior, he still found it difficult to trust the people of the Marquisate of Lurtis. After all, on the previous expedition, Amun saw scars on Aaron's back, and he couldn't believe that someone could do such a thing to the body of a noble lady, and it definitely couldn't be a stranger. He immediately assumed that Raymond was to blame for everything, since he had neither the opportunity nor the cruel nature. The young man admitted that in any case, if his luggage had remained, no one could have suspected an accident, but if it was not there, he simply returned back without warning. Besides, the second prince didn't say that they had little time if they wanted to reach the meeting place on time, and he was absolutely right. The loss of one knight was a serious blow to their forces, but searching for him would lead to an equal loss of forces, and the prince suggested that they simply leave together. If Ferdin made such a decision, everyone had no choice but to obey, because the mission was truly the most important thing. Erin also expressed her consent. She was completely satisfied with it, so all the heroes decided to move forward. The second prince ordered everyone to prepare for departure, and all the knights agreed with his opinion. Erin was actually afraid they might dig deeper, but everything turned out incredibly well, and she breathed a sigh of relief. Ferdin carefully took the girl's backpack. She looked at his kind gesture with bewilderment. The young man looked into her sincere eyes and asked if she was ready to accompany him today. He asked to ride next to her, because it was she who asked him to stay next to her throughout the mission, and he was ready to fulfill this condition. In fact, Irina was going to switch places with Derek, but now she didn't even have time to say anything. She understood that the prince was incredibly worried about her, and she had no choice but to follow him. A long and grueling journey began, and as soon as the heroes left the safe zone, they had to face monsters large and small. Standing back to back, they fought desperately despite the heavy pouring rain, and the closer they got to the territory of the wolf tribe, the less human presence became. To make matters worse, the weather suddenly changed and heavy rain began to pour down. Suddenly, the second prince saw an inn nearby and suggested that all the students push a little harder. After all, even well-trained knights could not help but get tired after fighting for a long time. This tavern turned out to be a real salvation for them, because for the first time in a long time, they were able to eat hot, tasty food. Eamon felt completely exhausted, and all the students supported him. Aaron completely agreed with his opinion. They had to endure many difficulties, and they bravely defeated all the monsters. All the students were incredibly tired, but from tomorrow they would have to leave their horses behind to walk along the mountain paths. Erin hadn't been involved in the subjugation of the Wolfskin tribe in the past, so she had no idea what the knights had been through. What she knew was that Sir Ferdinand had returned seriously injured, and that everyone who had gone refused to talk about what they had experienced there. Even if the heroine wanted to ask about those days, she couldn't ask people who hadn't experienced it themselves. She thought about it for a long time, and Amon asked the girl if everything was okay with her. The young man admitted that on the way here the lady had spent time dealing with Philip's guys, and that was indeed true. They actually had a conflict where the girl decided to prove that they could no longer treat her like that. When the students decided to beat her up and prove their case, Erin, with a straight face, prepared to show off her skills. This girl may be truly strong, but ironically, she was quite fragile, so Eamon asked her to take care of herself. The heroine didn't even imagine that he had such a kind side. It seemed to her that fatigue made people talk all sorts of nonsense. In any case, he just wanted her to take care of herself, because no one knew what awaited them once they entered the tribe's territory. From the very beginning, this mission was given by the Emperor to torment the second prince, and he always gave him overly burdensome tasks. Eamon's expression looked serious. The heroine realized that she should take his advice to heart, but suddenly she knocked the wooden mug of water off the table. The rain was getting heavier and heavier. The second prince returned with Derek before he nearly drowned while feeding all the horses. Ferdin still couldn't believe that Erin had broken off her engagement to him and decided to confess it. Now he noticed the girl standing with Sir Amon, while he carefully wiped drops of water from her hand. She spoke to him pleasantly, admitting that this was not the first time she had heard such questions from him that evening. As soon as the young man saw them together, he immediately remembered her words about how she really wanted to break off the engagement. Perhaps he doesn't know much about her, and now he suspects that the girl might be in a relationship with someone else. Derek turned to his partner, saying that he was too lost in his dreams, that he should hurry up and eat and then get some rest. Finally, all the heroes were able to breathe a sigh of relief, relax, and everyone was chatting happily with each other, finally having a delicious dinner. At that moment, the second prince decided not to bother himself with idle thoughts, because he needed to focus on checking if everyone had returned safe and sound. The heroes settled comfortably at the table, they were presented with a delicious treat, and they asked the second prince to hurry. He suddenly realized that among all the students, he still hadn't seen Lady Lily here. The young man asked if anyone knew where the girl had gone, because she was indeed nowhere to be found. At that moment, Lily was outside in the pouring rain until a shining magical symbol appeared next to her. She held a gold coin in her hands, and it was as if at that very moment she was preparing for something terrible. She stood there thinking about when the maid who served in the house of Marquis Lurtus came to her and told her sad things. It was she who presented the girl with gold coins and confessed that the lady asked to give them to the girl in order to somehow help with the funeral expenses. For Lilia, it was the most terrible day of her life, and she did not understand how gold coins could fix anything. And then the stranger confessed that all these coins were retribution for guilt, that the lady had failed to stop her villainous daughter, and that it was Erin who was responsible for the murder. It was then that Lilia was told that Erin had killed her brother, and the mistress of the house, Lurtus, was trying to somehow smooth over her guilt by claiming that her daughter was the murderer. Now the girl held in her hands the very same gold coin that the maid had given her immediately after the terrible news. All this time, Lily dreamed of taking revenge on the villain for the fact that she so carelessly took someone's life, and she herself still lives happily. Every morning Lily got up with only one thought: she would definitely take revenge. The girl killed her brother and then dared to laugh at it. Lily was incredibly angry because Erin was still alive and well, and what's more, she had become the best friend of all the knights, and they treated her with special respect. The sister promised herself that very soon the moment would come when Erin would finally stop laughing and fully realize her guilt. Therefore, the heroine turned to the mistress's assistant and told her that she really wanted to avenge her brother's death, and the maid offered her one way. Every breath, every heartbeat echoed the tragedy that divided her life into before and after. The pain that ate away at her from within demanded a way out, and that way out had to be revenge. Lily knew that revenge was a road strewn with thorns, but she was ready to walk along it barefoot, just to quench her thirst. She carefully planned every step, studied Erin's habits, her weak points, her surroundings. A week ago, the heroes finally arrived at their destination, a journey that had taken an incredible amount of effort, but they were pursuing a single goal. They arrived at the place where they were supposed to meet the wolf tribe, and each of the knights was ready to engage in mortal combat. The meeting place was a ruined castle that once belonged to people, but now only ruins remained, once reminiscent of a luxurious life. Fortunately, the heroes arrived in time, and the second prince was worried because they were walking through mountainous terrain and even had to leave their horses behind. The young man ordered Derek to notify all the knights. They had finally arrived at the appointed place, but everyone needed to rest before the meeting time. Evening was slowly falling over the forest. Ferdin knew that everything would depend on the speed and power of the arriving warriors, but Count Leon was still absent, and something was definitely wrong here. The reinforcements he had promised never appeared on the horizon, and Prince Ferdinand was worried. Derek approached his friend and said that the appointed time had long passed, and the Count was definitely not the type of person to be late, and Ferdin assumed that it looked like Leon would not come at all. Count Leon was a man who was obsessed with rules, who would throw himself into the fire. He would certainly not disobey the order of His Majesty. The prince had only one option. Perhaps he had certain circumstances. The Count's arrival here was also the Emperor's will, and everyone was sure he could not go against him, but now everything was turning out completely differently than the knights had expected. the second prince confidently stated that they would need to return, and with this team they would not be able to deal with the wolf-skin tribe alone. Derek understood the gentleman's mood perfectly well, but he was definitely against returning from the expedition empty-handed. At least he assured that they should send out a search party to scout the area. Since they had already entered the tribe's territory, they needed to prove that they had made an effort to conduct a search. Derek whispered in Ferdinand's ear that there might also be imperial rats among the knights, and from now on they should be careful. None of the students understood why the count had not arrived at the appointed time. Many were tired, and if they returned from the expedition without having accomplished anything, all the consequences would definitely fall on Ferdinand. The prince understood, which meant Derek also suspected that there were spies among them. He understood that they had found her, meaning that if they returned without any reason, his father would definitely hold him accountable. The worst thing is that other knights may also fall under the emperor's terrible wrath because they followed the second prince. And Ferdinand certainly could not allow this to happen, because the best students were absolutely not guilty of anything. On the one hand, the prince understood that they definitely couldn't cope alone, so he asked Derek to send a search party as soon as possible. The prince was well aware that his small detachment needed support, needed fresh forces to turn the tide of events, but he set one condition: the detachment had to be small in number, but consist of the best warriors who could act quickly and silently. Derek, having listened to the order, only nodded. Without asking unnecessary questions, he knew that not only their lives were at stake, but also the fate of all the students and the expedition. Erin caught a glimpse of the second prince talking to his assistant for a long time, and she also understood that something was going on here. Sir Ferdinand and Sir Derek spoke in such low voices that the other knights could not hear them at all, but they did not escape Erin's keen hearing. The search party was organized in groups of 4, and the second prince commanded the knights to be extremely careful because the wolfskin tribe was incredibly ferocious. They were tasked with exploring the wolfskin's territory, and each knight prepared to carry out the prince's orders with particular attention. At the same time, safety was the highest priority, and everyone understood that anything could be expected from this expedition, but they still lacked reinforcements. However, when the search party returned, the second prince still regretted his choice because something terrible happened. No one expected that something like this could happen, and unfortunately, not all the knights returned in full force after the search. The young man could not believe that this had actually happened, and asked those who had returned to tell him in detail what had happened to them in the terrible forest. They reported that Lord Aemon and Lady Lilia were kidnapped by the leaders of the Wolfskin tribe, which is why they were unable to return. Lily and Aemon were kidnapped by the Wolfskin tribe, a sudden attack that took them by surprise like a bolt from the blue. Panic was their main enemy, and the heroes had almost no chance of salvation. The knights fought to the last, but were tied up and kidnapped in the depths of the dark forest. One of the students said that they were returning from searching, but were suddenly ambushed. Aemon and Lilia asked them to run while they held back the advance of the Wolfskins. For the Wolfskins, a mage is an invaluable hostage, since the tribe did not have its own mages or tribesmen who would possess strong abilities. Erin thought about it, not understanding why something like this had happened, because she was sure that this had definitely not happened in the past. Despite numerous injuries, the knights returned safely to the academy, and she remembered very well that none of them managed to end up captured. There was only one option left had she changed the future too much, and therefore the fate of the academy's knights had been distorted. Since in the previous expedition she managed to save the Holy Princess and also deal with the main villain, and this is probably the main reason. On top of that, the students were now incredibly panicked. Even under normal conditions, it was difficult to resist the Wolfskin tribe, and in this state, rescuing the hostages seemed almost impossible. The only thing the heroine knew for sure and was sure of was that now she needed to save the best knights. She could see that Sir Ferdinand was puzzled by what had happened, and Erin was incredibly eager to help him. It might be safer for him to go with Erin, but on the other hand, she was sure it might be better to leave him behind. While the knights were thinking about what to do next, an arrow, feathered with a dark raven feather, pierced a tree near them, a signal shot. The Wolfskin tribe was no longer hiding. The knights, stunned by the sudden attack, momentarily lost their bearings and managed to notice a huge arrow flying into the tree. There was no doubt left in anyone's mind that this arrow belonged to the Wolfskin tribe, and that meant they were getting too close. From the forest, as if from the mouth of a beast, warriors of the tribe burst forth, their eyes burning with wild rage. Chaos began. Enormous wolves with sharp fangs bared their teeth as they headed towards the knights, their fur thick and impenetrable, and their eyes burning with a primal fire. The knights quickly realized that when they returned from their search, the tribe had probably managed to track them and had been hiding somewhere nearby the whole time. A silence hung in the air, a harbinger of an approaching storm. The knights stood motionless, awaiting the command. Prince Ferdinand, despite his anxiety, maintained an unperturbed appearance. Enormous wolves with hellish eyes approached and were ready to rush into battle. The warriors, like a reflection of their bestial allies, bared their teeth, anticipating a bloody harvest. Ferdinand gripped the hilt of his sword, feeling a chill run down his spine. This was a fight with the wildest nature, with the darkness lurking in the hearts of men and beasts. Everyone understood that their lives were hanging by a thread. Fatigue was growing stronger with each passing minute, and the number of enemies was only increasing, but in the eyes of the knights burned the fire of hatred for their enemies and devotion to their prince. Erin tried to assess the situation. She counted about 10 huge werewolves, but they did not look strong, so the whole crowd of knights surrounded them. The main problem was that the wolf tribe could call for help at any moment thanks to their howl, and they could easily call even more of their tribesmen here. Moreover, most of the knights were already confused, and some of them did not even have the strength left to continue the battle. Therefore, Erin was convinced that it was the weak knights who might be the first to try to kill at such a moment of retreat, which was the best decision. The werewolf tribe, as if sensing weakness, increased their attack. The wolves growled, and it seemed, but Ferdinand and Erin stood unwavering. Erin decided that she should distract the werewolves so that the knights could escape safely, and the wolves would not run after them. The earth trembled under the paws of monstrous beasts, and the foul smell of wool and blood corroded the lungs. Erin threw a gold coin at the head of one of the wolves to divert its attention. The loud blow worked perfectly. The beast growled and recoiled, looking around furiously in search of the source of the sound. The Assurance was holding a gold coin in his hands, and the leader of the wolfskin tribe looked at his opponents with fury. Erin, taking advantage of this momentary pause, rushed in the other direction, distracting some of the attackers. Erin was completely confident in her abilities, so she decided to distract the entire tribe to help her partners. The wolves rushed towards Erin, growling ferociously, their fangs like daggers glinting in the moonlight, and the hellish fire in their eyes spoke of imminent death. In her plan, crazy and the only possible one, there was a last spark of hope. She rushed into the forest. A furious growl was heard behind her. The tribe rushed after her. Erin ran without looking where she was going, trusting only her instincts. She knew that she was being hunted not by just animals, but by something much more dangerous: werewolves, creatures endowed with intelligence and monstrous strength. Looking at this, the prince could not believe that the girl was going to deal with the bloodthirsty tribe alone again, because all the wolves were running after her. He saw the werewolves running after the girl, and he remained behind, and he was absolutely sure that she was going to distract them in this way. Erin's heart burned with a fire of rage and determination that gave her the strength to move on. She ran to take revenge and save the knights of the academy. The second prince shouted to his partner Derek to run as quickly as possible with the weakened knights, while he himself rushed in the other direction. Ferdinand knew the squad had to run to save itself, and now he was completely confident in his decision. While Derek looked at his master in bewilderment as he tried to save them, the young man ordered his partner to keep the promise he had made to him. Derek had a huge responsibility on his shoulders. He needed to take care of the wounded knights and find help somewhere. Not all knights agreed with these conditions, and one of them rushed to help the master, ignoring his order. He asked Derek to let him go, saying that he must definitely help Sir deal with the bloodthirsty tribe. The young man stated that caring for the wounded on the expedition was the most important thing, but he didn't want to listen to him at all. When the second prince spoke with Derek, he immediately stated that it was necessary to send a detachment to reconnoiter the territory. He said there was one condition that would need to be met if the wolfskin tribe was to emerge, and the only priority would be survival. Ferdinand warned that if anything happened to him, Derek must promise that in that case he would take full care of the remaining knights. Sir Ferdinand had entrusted him with the safety of all the best knights of the academy, and of course the young man was obliged to fulfill his duty. Therefore, he persuaded his partner to flee on the orders of the second prince, because it also concerned him. But the young man desperately did not want to follow this order, because he felt that his help was incredibly needed now. Blood spattered through the air, staining the leaves and tree trunks crimson. Every swing of the sword was precise and deadly, leaving the werewolves no chance of escape. Even seasoned wolves who had seen more than one battle retreated before her onslaught, feeling the inhuman strength emanating from this fragile girl. The werewolves began to lose their fighting spirit, their rage was replaced by fear, and their confidence by uncertainty. They no longer rushed into the attack, but retreated back like cornered rats. Erin felt victory approaching. Rage and courage filled her, giving her new strength. She continued the offensive, not giving the werewolves a break. She will fight until the last werewolf falls to the ground, until the blood of her enemies washes away the shame of defeat. He, the Lord of the Night, suddenly realized that he was standing on the threshold of his own destruction, and it was not the mighty warrior who was to blame, but the young warrior, whose rage burned brighter than flame. The leader gave the order to retreat with a roar, and the wolves, as if obeying an invisible force, turned back at once and rushed into the thicket, carrying the wounded and dead with them. Doubt arose in his bestial heart, and with it a primal fear. Erin stood there, clutching her bloody sword tightly, while on the grass sat a wounded wolf who definitely didn't consider this girl a human. At that moment, Erin clearly realized that someone was following her. She looked around, but did not notice anything. She guessed that the second prince was probably heading towards her now, although she had clearly made it clear to him that he should flee with the others. The heroine didn't understand why Ferden decided to follow her, but fortunately he still hadn't managed to find her. She turned to the pack leader, confessing that they were not going to kill him, because she needed him to convey an important message. The bloodied wolf trembled on the damp grass, and the girl asked him to tell her that if anyone from the tribe touched her comrades even with a finger, they would all face inevitable death. She saw true terror in his eyes, and Erin warned his fellow tribesmen to prepare for death if they dared to attack. The wolf ran away with his tail between his legs. The pack retreated, bristling with fear, with their tails between their legs, dissolving into the night darkness. Erin was strong. Inhumanly strong, as if the earth itself had absorbed her rage and thirst for justice. She knew it was only a temporary respite. The wolfskins would surely return. Their thirst for blood was insatiable, but now they knew they would meet a worthy enemy. All this time, Ferden was desperately trying to find Erin, and finally he managed to notice tracks on one of the paths. He looked around carefully to understand who these tracks belonged to and how long ago they had been there. The tracks led towards werewolf territory, and he realized that these tracks definitely belonged to Erin. He managed to see her disappear into the deep forest along with the wolfskin tribe, but the young man understood that it was extremely dangerous to be here. The second prince's mother was a great saint. She could see the future and hear the voices of the goddess, and of course, during her lifetime, she also saw the future of her son. One day she confessed to her beloved son that he had countless lives on his shoulders, and he absolutely had to survive. The mother was incredibly worried that the boy would have to bear this burden all alone, but she asked him to promise one thing. Shortly before her death, she broke the saint's law and told her son about the prophecy, telling him about his hard life. She became his guiding star, regardless of his choice, and this was one of the main reasons why the second principal still endured this hell. The werewolf tribe was known for its cruelty. They never left their hostages alive and kept all the nearby villages in fear. If Ferden encounters a large group of werewolves on his way, his life will most likely end here, in the dark, gloomy forest. The young man understood perfectly well that the beasts could use him as a hostage against the Empire, so nothing would change even if he went to look for Erin. He saw how desperately she ran into the forest with the bloodthirsty werewolves, ready to save all the knights again at the cost of her own life. The moment he saw the fragile girl leading the werewolves away, he had a strange feeling. They will start anew, heal their wounds and gather new strength. Their names will become legends, and their feet will live on for centuries. And the second prince had no doubt that he had to go and save the warlike lady, even if it costs him his own life, even if after this decision he regrets what he did. In Ferden's palm lay the very same pendant that his mother had once given him to protect her son with its magical properties. Previously, it was she who wore this pendant, and now the prince asked for the blessing of his safe meeting with Lady Erin and asked for the magical pendant for help. He tightly clutched the magic amulet given to him by his mother and believed that everything would definitely work out for them. As soon as the young man thought about this, he suddenly heard quiet footsteps and turned towards the dark forest. To his great surprise, Lady Erin was heading straight towards him, completely alive. Her eyes showed the story of the horror she had experienced and the unwavering will to win. She walked with her head held high, like a queen returning from exile. She approached Ferdin and quietly asked why the young man was here. She saw him completely by accident. Erin was incredibly happy for one thing. The master was safe, and that meant he had managed to avoid a skirmish with the werewolves. She shouted at Ferdin to return immediately to the other knights, but the young man wondered why he should return. Erin headed into the thicket of the forest, admitting that she still had important things to do, and Ferdin was perplexed because it could cost her life. The prince shouted, did the girl really decide to save Aemon and Lilia alone, and was ready to go on such a dangerous mission? Her silence spoke louder than any words. Erin had made the right decision with complete confidence in her eyes. Looking at the gentleman, she realized that it seemed like he was not going to return, and he followed closely behind her. In his hands he held a sword, sparkling in the rays of the moon, like a symbol of hope. He was waiting for it, preparing for the final battle. The prince had no intention of leaving and declared that he would go with Erin wherever she went, his words echoing through the silent forest, filling the air with new hope. Ferdin smiled and stated that if something needed to be done, then together they could definitely do it faster, and the lady should not even think about going there alone. Unfortunately, the young man had no idea that Erin was a true master of the sword and that the blood of a brave warrior flowed through her veins. Usually, if a knight entered werewolf territory, he would be treated as a madman for such recklessness. Ferdin was caught trying to dissuade her, but her plan was to convince him to go back and leave her alone. She didn't even think that the young man would offer to go together, but perhaps it was even for the best. Although the heroes were now in a very dangerous situation, ironically, next to her, the swordmaster, was the safest place for the master. So Erin smiled and replied that she agreed to go together, but she wanted to convey one very important idea to the young man. Sir Ferdinand was the second prince of the empire. The lady warned that if an unexpected, dangerous situation suddenly occurred, she decided to step forward. This was her main condition, and after thinking for a bit, the young man finally agreed to do as she wanted. Of course, he hadn't planned on putting Erin on his defense, but he felt like if he answered differently, she would refuse to go with him. Once the decision was made, the heroes moved forward, confidently striding through the dark forest, hoping to find their missing knights. In any case, there was only one path, and the deeper it went into the thicket of the forest, the closer they were to the enraged werewolves. The situation was becoming more and more dangerous. They were getting closer and closer to the werewolf camp, where they were holding Aemon and Lilia captive. On the way, the heroes tried to be as quiet as possible, because if one of the wolves noticed them, it would lead to a new battle. The girl was confidently walking into a period, and at one point the prince decided to turn to her because he noticed something. Erin was clearly tired, so the young man suggested that they take a little rest to regain their strength before the upcoming battle. The full moon rose in the night sky, meaning that the wolf tribe was now awake and ready to attack. They managed to find a huge tree near which they could hide from the werewolves and also take a little rest. He saw Erin not just as a warrior, but as a kindred spirit, someone whose spirit was in tune with his own. Ferdin asked why the girl decided to go so far to save these two, since her own life was at stake. All this time, the heroine was driven by only one thought: she had an important matter that she had to deal with right this night. And remembering Calypso, she admitted that she had a life debt that she was obliged to repay. Also, in his past life, Mr. Aemon bravely fought monsters, standing up to protect a fragile girl. The prince did not understand what debt exactly was being discussed, Erin asked in response. The young man could have sent other knights, but instead he came in person. And he certainly did it for a reason, driven by life principles and knightly honor. After Erin distracted the werewolves, he could have simply run away and returned to the other knights at any moment, but the young man did not do so. He only bravely followed her, finding himself completely alone in the territory of the Wolfskin tribe. Therefore, the prince could not abandon them, because it was Aemon and Lilia, as well as Lady Erin herself, who would not have ended up in this forest if it were not for him. Up until now, many people had sacrificed themselves to keep the prince alive, so now he didn't want to stand by and just watch more casualties. As long as the young man was in the werewolf territory, his companions would be alive, and even if he was taken prisoner, with his status, the werewolves would not dare kill him without reason. That's why he went after Aaron alone, and he admitted that when he looked at this girl, he definitely felt that there was some kind of connection between them. The prince was also constantly haunted by a strange feeling, a sense of duty, as if he had forgotten to do something in this life. Something very important, connected with Lady Erin, as well as with all the knights, to whom he is infinitely grateful. He sat down next to the brave heroine. At that moment the girl realized that this could not be, but Sir Ferdinand knew something. Looking at his sincere face, Erin wondered if the young man could really see into her past through his unique ability. She learned that the second prince had the ability quite late in her past life, if he had seen her earlier, the past lives she had gone through. So, without a doubt, he saw her past, and he also managed to see the future, in which a terrible situation occurred. It is in the future, due to the fault of the Empire's greatest villain, that the second prince must die. Erin felt a slight tremor in her body, and now she wondered what she should do next. If the second prince really managed to see the past, as well as the future, where he must die tragically. Erin really wanted her thoughts not to be reality, but Ferdinand was acting very strange. While they were in a safe place, discussing everything that was happening, the heroes suddenly heard strange rustling sounds. They understood that there should definitely be no one in this forest except them and the bloodthirsty werewolves, so the young man bravely grabbed his sword. They could be attacked at any moment, but the next second the heroes saw a low-ranking magical beast, similar to a rabbit, which was herbivorous and completely safe for humans. A small rabbit was sitting nearby in the bushes, calmly chewing grass, and Ferdinand, seeing him, was simply touched. The magical assurance was definitely not supposed to know where the heroes were, so all this time they carefully concealed their presence. The young man turned to Erin, who might have been scared, but the girl was completely fine. The young man apologized, looking into Erin's eyes, and admitted that he seemed to have pushed her away a little roughly. Her heart, long bound by fear and pain, began to thaw, filling with warmth and hope. She knew that a long and dangerous path lay ahead of them, but now that the prince was nearby, she felt invulnerable. Erin certainly couldn't answer that question when it all started, but after killing the monster, she began to look at the second prince with a sad look. As the second prince, Ferdinand was used to being looked at with admiration, so he initially mistook her gaze for the same as everyone else's. The only thing that interested him was that her gaze was really different from the others, and that was what attracted him. Erin decided to ask Ferdinand for forgiveness, and if anyone asked, what emotions were in her eyes. It was impossible to express these feelings in words, and the young man decided right then and there to find out why the girl had decided to break off their engagement. Ferdinand could not understand all the emotions that were hidden in the depths of her sincere, silent eyes. Each expedition brought them closer together, and Ferdinand could not get used to the idea of the recent announcement, and admitted that he would not at all like to break off the engagement. Erin didn't understand whether she was dreaming all this, and the prince had just admitted that he didn't want to break off the engagement. For some reason, Ferdinand still called her lady and looked into her eyes with special kindness. Students majoring in fencing must graduate from the academy to officially become knights, so everyone called each other sir or lady as a sign of respect. In the future, the academy students might become partners in the same battle, but Erin was sure that those around her despised her, and instead of addressing her as a lady, they simply called her Erin. Except for one person, the second prince, who immediately addressed her as a lady, because he was sure that very soon she would become a brave knight. The young man was incredibly kind. Erin felt it perfectly, and in his past life, he looked at her exactly the same way as he did now. His eyes were full of sincerity, but the heroine still could not understand why he treated her so well. Maybe the second prince had some specific feelings. Erin couldn't find the answers to these questions, but she felt that all this was too strange. He knew that fate was a treacherous thing, and now, faced with this wild tribe, they would have to make a choice that would determine their future path. Does the salvation of the world depend on them, or will they become just another victim of the ancient forces awakening in these forests? The sounds coming from somewhere far away could not be confused with anything else. The growling grew louder, getting closer with each passing second, and it became clear that hiding was useless. A vicious growl, imbued with animal rage, the wolfskin tribe was right next to them. The heroes saw that the werewolves had grabbed the child. Their huge fangs seemed as if they would tear the tender flesh with one movement. The small figure dangled helplessly in the air, and a heart-rending scream pierced the silence of the night, echoing in the depths of the forest. The knights watched everything that was happening. The bloodthirsty beasts had just captured the child, but for some reason his face was incredibly familiar to Eren. Hot tears, mixing with dirt and fur, streamed down his frightened face. Each breath was difficult, a hoarse sob interrupted by an animalistic roar coming from directly above his head. It seemed that everything was over, that there was no hope. But somewhere deep in my soul, a small spark of faith was glimmering. Faith that help would come. Eren desperately tried to remember why this child's face was familiar to her, and finally the memories came flooding back to her. In her first life, a few years after this moment, the Empire was invaded by werewolves, and many of the Empire's inhabitants were killed. At that time, the werewolf tribe was led by a human child, and the boy was a wizard who could freely use fire magic. Rumor had it the boy was a refugee captured by a werewolf tribe years ago, and it was he. One of the werewolves grabbed the child, but the next second he screamed with incredible pain that struck his entire body. All the events were definitely different from the past. Then the boy was on their side. That is why they could attack. Now this child was absolutely merciless, and one of the werewolves growled angrily at how he managed to burn his paw. The enraged werewolf grabbed the boy again, becoming angrier and angrier with each passing second, ready to kill him right now. The knights watched to see what would happen next, looking for the right moment to finally save the boy. At that moment, when the boy realized that he was about to die, he closed his eyes and with tears in his eyes began to beg someone to save him. Like a whirlwind, a warrior burst into the gloom of the ancient forest, his sword sparkling in the moonlight, cutting through the air like lightning. The heroes rushed into the attack with all their might, every blow aimed at saving the child, because they knew that if the werewolves were not stopped now, darkness would engulf this world forever. Fangs and claws against steel and magic, the earth shook under the weight of huge bodies, the air filled with the smell of blood and sulfur. Finally, the prince managed to snatch the child from the clutches of the bloodthirsty creature. He shouted that he would distract the werewolves' attention right now. He decided to give the boy to her and asked her to run away immediately with the child to save him. The next second, the heroes felt something strange happening as blood splashed around them. There were too many werewolves. They pressed from all sides, their fangs and claws inexorably approaching. Lady Eren fought bravely, the blade of her sword, forged in dragonfire, cutting through the darkness like a beam of light in the darkness. She spun, deadly, not allowing fear to hinder her movements, while the blood of her enemies spattered her face and clothes, but this only fueled her rage. Eren felt the fatigue tightening in her muscles, but she didn't give up. She knew that the lives of the child and Ferdin depended on her. Gathering her last strength, she swung her sword, creating a whirlwind of steel and fire around herself. The werewolves retreated for a moment, but only to regroup and resume the attack. It seemed like a never-ending battle, a battle for survival that could never be won, but Eren wasn't about to give up. Ferdin watched the incredible skills of the brave warrior and remembered her words before the campaign. She asked him to retreat if things got too bad. Eren asked that if the situation became dangerous, she would rush forward and the prince would need to save his life. And at that moment, the young man realized that these were not empty words, and Eren was completely confident in her skills. Judging by the way she deftly handles a sword and deals with bloodthirsty monsters, this girl definitely can't be a newbie. The reason why the heroine hid her abilities as carefully as she could was only because she thought it would be difficult to live her old life again. Therefore, she needed to keep her stepmother under control and at the same time change the past, the future, in such a way that no one would know about it. And in order to save the knights, Eren thought there was no way out except to show certain skills, but now she was a little scared to see Ferdin's reaction. A few months ago, the Duke came to the academy and dealt with the monsters after visiting it. The princess told Eren that her father seemed very pleased with her, as he had seen the girl at the training camp before he came here. The Duke was confident that Eren was incredibly strong and courageous, and possessed unique abilities as a swordmaster. The gentleman was strict about training knights, and it was simply impossible to hear praise from him, but the Duke saw a completely unusual talent in the girl. When Ferdinand spoke to him, he didn't realize at the time how good Lady Erin's skills really were. He had never actually seen her ability in action before, only now did he realize what talent this girl possessed. She obviously has been practicing fencing for a very long time, because even an experienced knight would hardly be able to cope with a tribe of wolfskins. And only now did the second prince realize that for some reason, Erin had hidden her abilities until this moment. Looking at her brave battle, he remembered that sweet girl who was crying from unbearable pain in his vision. Ferdinand wondered if something had happened to the heroine in the past, and there must be a reason why she hid her skills so carefully. The heroes needed to change location as quickly as possible before more reinforcements arrived for the werewolves. And the young man didn't ask any questions after seeing Erin's skills with his own eyes, and she couldn't understand whether he was really going to just let it pass. The little boy had been sitting on the grass all this time and was shaking very badly, so the hero decided to find out if everything was okay with him. Ferdinand decided to examine the boy to make sure that he had not received any wounds from the paws of bloodthirsty monsters. As soon as he looked at the boy's face and saw the bright red light in his eyes, the prince finally understood everything. This boy is definitely not an ordinary person. His eyes are burning with a scarlet fire, and the werewolf who was holding him just threw him away at one point. Fire came out of the boy's hands. Many considered him a monster in human form who possessed real magic. That's why the werewolves decided to kidnap him, and for them, wizards were the most valuable hostages. The prince suddenly had a vision. It was a terrible memory, and the stronger the vision, the more tired he felt. He managed to see the future. The young man said that the leader of the werewolves wants to capture this child, and they are definitely not going to create. Erin had warned that if the beasts found out they had the child, they could harm Aemon, Lilia, and the other villagers, so she was sure they needed to leave before the werewolves figured it out. The problem was, the heroes didn't know where the sinister tribe was holding the prisoners, and Erin suddenly announced that she knew the place. The prince didn't expect to hear this. The girl was next to him, but in fact, she felt it all this time. Suddenly, Erin admitted that she knew where this place was, and all this time she had felt its mana, strong, animal-like, and right now she was ready to go to the werewolves' lair to finally save her friends.